Chapter 749. Bedivere was stunned. Sure enough, how could he hide his physical condition from Mr. Villo? Mr. Villo, you can see it? Wu Ming nodded as a matter of course. I can see it. Whether it's the truth that you are not a servant but a human, or the truth that the arm is constantly destroying your body, I can see it. Wu Ming sighed. It's been hard for you for nearly 1,000 years, Bedivere. Although it was not clear what Bedivere had experienced in the past 1,000 years, Wu Ming knew that it must be a bad feeling. I don't feel pain, Mr. Villo, this is what I should bear. Bedivere smiled at Wu Ming. The strength of the heart was more important than the strength of the body. Nearly 1,000 years had worn away Bedivere's body, but Bedivere's heart was not shaken at all. He had been looking for King Arthur, looking for the king of the undead who walked on the earth because of his mistake. His ultimate goal was to make up for his mistakes. I'm used to the pain of the body. Bedivere's eyes flashed with hope that would not be extinguished. It was a strong hope to redeem Artoria. As long as there was a goal and did not give up, mortals could be compared to gods. Wu Ming smiled. This was the Bedivere he knew, this was the Bedivere he knew, this was the Knight of the Round Table. But it's still the same sentence. Since I'm here, it's okay to relax a little. Yes, Mr. Villo, I will rely on you. Bedivere nodded, then opened the red potion given by Wu Ming and drank it. But then Bedivere's eyes widened. This potion? Wu Ming looked at him doubtfully. Was there a problem with this potion? Impossible, right? It seems a bit sweet. Bedivere said thoughtfully. Wu Ming smiled helplessly. This guy, as always, made jokes that he didn't realize. Assassin. At this time, Gadotzi's voice came from a distance behind. Tachika is here. Wu Ming looked behind him. Gadotzi was running toward here. Then Wu Ming stood up and looked at Bedivere beside him. Then let's go, Knight Lucius. Since Bedivere intended to hide his identity, Wu Ming would not ask more, and he would not uncover Bedivere's true identity. After all, this kind of thing should be explained by the person himself. Wu Ming wouldn't cross the line, not to mention that Bedivere was one of his own. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he walked towards the direction where Gudazi came from. Lucius. Bedivere shook his head. This name was only given because of his relationship with the Silver Right Hand, so it didn't matter if his identity was exposed or not. At the gate of the Holy City, if Drunk Hassan hadn't risked his life to hold Gawain back, he would have been exposed at that time. But thanks to Drunk Hassan's cover, most of the refugees were successfully rescued by Matthew and Bedivere. In fact, if Bedivere was there, Drunk Hassan might not have died. His right hand restrained the Knights of the Round Table who were endowed with the blessing of the Holy Grail, so Gawain couldn't do anything to him. But he couldn't take down Gawain either. However, in that case the number of rescued refugees may be reduced. Drunk Hassan did not have the silver arm like Bedivere. Bedivere was more efficient in defeating the Solemn Knight. But even so, the result was still uncertain. Maybe none of them could escape at that time. And the past can't be changed, only made up. So Bedivere was not going to regret it, but he was going to take more care of these villagers. Standing up, Bedivere turned and walked back along Wu Ming's path. From a distance he saw Gadotzi throw herself into Wu Ming's arms. Bedivere had never seen Gadotzi throw herself into anyone's arms, so he was a little surprised. Is the relationship between Sir Fujimaru and Villo so good? The atmosphere between the two looks like siblings. Bedivere's first thought was not a couple, but a brother and sister. If it weren't for the hair color, face shape and timeline, Bedivere might really think that Wu Ming and Gadotzi were siblings. Shaking his head, Bedivere strolled over and stopped 5 meters away from the two. After all, he was not like Mordred, he was very good at reading the atmosphere. At this time, Gadotzi and Wu Ming also separated and talked. I'm sorry, assassin, we failed to live up to the task you entrusted to us. We couldn't enter the Holy City and be your ambassador. Gadotzi lowered her head with some guilt. But you saved a lot of human beings. I'm very satisfied that you could make the choice you thought was right at that time. Wu Ming rubbed Gadotzi's little head and comforted her. That's right, I guess that assassin would say that. Gadotzi raised her head, and the gloomy look disappeared in an instant. Wu Ming laughed involuntarily and put on a, I was fooled by you look. Well, it's not that Wu Ming deliberately pretended to be deceived, he's just spoiling Gadotzi. Senpai, in the distance, Matthew panted and shouted as he ran over. Ah, Matthew. Gadotzi waved to Matthew. Not only that, but Matthew was followed by Cursed Wrist Hassan, Hyuga Hassan, and Da Vinci. Cursed Wrist Hassan, Hundred Faces Hassan, and Mashu ran over, but Da Vinci walked over at a leisurely pace. Senpai Villo, Mr. Lucius, hello. Matthew, who arrived in front of Gadotzi first, greeted Wu Ming and Lucius. Ah, is Mr. Lucius here? I didn't see him just now. Gadotsi scratched the back of her head embarrassedly. Don't worry about me, Mr. Fujimaru. However, Bedivere shook his head. He didn't care if he was noticed or not. But you, senpai, you ran too fast. Matthew looked depressed. After learning from Da Vinci that Wu Ming went to find Lucius, Gadotsi ran out quickly. Although she and Cursed Wrist Hassan quickly followed, they were still left behind by Gadotsi. Gadotsi, who looked around, finally learned about Wu Ming's whereabouts from a woman with a rather rosy face. Hyuga Hassan, who joined the search for Gadotsi, saw Gadotsi. After informing Cursed Wrist Hassan and Matthew, they all followed her. As for Da Vinci, he was just watching. Seeing so many people, Wu Ming simply stopped chatting with Gadotsi. Everyone, I have something to say. Wu Ming spoke. He was ready to explain what was going to happen next. Looking around at everyone, Wu Ming continued. I already have a preliminary plan. Chapter 750. Because of Wu Ming, everyone came to the residence of Gadotsi and others, ready to discuss Wu Ming's plan. Because of this, Bedivere did not clarify his identity to Gadotsi and others. But identity or not, it didn't matter to Gadotsi. Whether it was Lucius or Bedivere, they were all good people who helped them, weren't they? In the room, a stone round table was placed in the center of the room, which was created by Wu Ming with Create Green item. When he saw this table, Bedivere was shocked because, except for some details and patterns, this was exactly Camelot's round table. But because Bedivere was currently concealing his identity, he controlled his expression very well. Everyone sat around the round table, sitting on a stone seat with a backrest like a throne made by Wu Ming, waiting for Wu Ming, who was sitting at the head of the table, to speak. This made Bedivere a little helpless. Wu Ming completely recreated the round table, and those seats were where the knights of the round table sat. But Bedivere just thought about it in his heart and did not say it out loud. Da Vinci was a little interested in the stone seat he was sitting on and the round table in front of him. He looked around as if he wanted to observe these arts. Although Gadotsi was not as serious as Da Vinci, she was also very interested in these stone seats and round tables. On the other hand, Hundred Faces Hassan and Cursed Wrist Hassan sat upright with serious expressions. Matthew, on the other hand, looked quite nervous. Matthew knew that his servant was Galahad, but he didn't know that the table in front of him was a round table. He just felt nervous subconsciously. It seemed that it was because of Galahad that caused Matthew to have such a timid appearance. First of all, Tachika, I'll leave this to you. Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi. Then, golden ripples appeared beside Wu Ming, and a golden cup emerged from the ripples. This is the Holy Grail. Matthew shouted excitedly. Except for Hassan, who had already seen it once, others were more or less surprised, especially Chaldea's group. There was no other reason, but the Holy Grail this time was too easy to obtain. This is what I got from the Sun King, this special Holy Grail. Wu Ming said and threw it to Gadotsi. Hey, Gadotsi caught the Holy Grail rather agilely. After experiencing this kind of catching movement several times, Gadotsi was no longer the child who was easily flustered at the beginning. Doctor, can you recover the Holy Grail? Gadotsi raised her arm and asked the bracelet on her wrist. In response, the bracelet made a sound. Just wait a moment, because I didn't expect you. I need to wait a moment. However, Roman's voice gave people the feeling that he was flustered. Recovery is not urgent. Romani, can you identify this Holy Grail? Da Vinci said to the air. Although Da Vinci was not close to Gadotsi, Romani, who was monitoring the scene, still heard Da Vinci's words. Identification is still possible, I'll do it now. Roman's voice came from Gadotsi's bracelet. With the bracelet and the Holy Grail in such a close distance, identification was not a problem. Da Vinci knew this, so he made this request to Roman. And Da Vinci asked Roman to identify the Holy Grail, not because he did not trust Wu Ming, but because it was a necessary process. It was always right to be cautious, and Wu Ming agreed with this point, so Wu Ming did not say anything. Identification is complete, it is indeed the Holy Grail, but... Roman seemed to want to say something, but he hesitated. However, Roman still said it out loud. Although it is the Holy Grail, it is still impossible to determine whether it is the Holy Grail that caused this singularity. Roman's tone was full of caution, as if he was afraid of offending people. Doctor, this is the Holy Grail that Senior Villo painstakingly obtained from the Sun King. How can you have doubts? Matthew righteously defended his senior. I believe in Assassin, since he said it is the Holy Grail of the singularity, then it must be. Gadotsi expressed her trust in Wu Ming. Ah, Romani is being targeted, Da Vinci laughed in schadenfreude. That's why I was considering whether to say it or not. Roman sighed helplessly. However, it is not unreasonable to be cautious. Roman having such a guess makes me happy. Seeing Roman so embarrassed and helpless, Wu Ming could not help but help him find a way out. Wu Ming changed his tone and continued to speak. However, whether this Holy Grail is the Holy Grail that caused this singularity or not, it has no impact on our next plan. Oh, did you find something unusual? Da Vinci looked at Wu Ming curiously. Wu Ming nodded as if it was a matter of course. The safety of this singularity is now in the hands of the Lion King. She has the power to destroy this singularity, and also the power to destroy this singularity. Because Artoria hid something from Wu Ming guessed that what Artoria hid was the most important thing. Maybe it was related to the safety of this singularity. Indeed, in this way, whether this Holy Grail is the Holy Grail that caused this singularity or not is meaningless. Roman understood what Wu Ming meant. If this singularity was affected by the Lion King, then even if the Holy Grail was recovered, it would not be able to completely save this singularity. Others also understood this truth. Then what we need to do now is to defeat the Lion King. Bedivere asked. After all, if it was Artoria that caused this singularity, then it must be Bedivere's doing. Therefore, to defeat the king and bring the king back to the right path, he had to do his part. Although things are not completely clear yet, it is certain that we are currently hostile to the Lion King. Wu Ming did not answer Bedivere's question. In short, let's gather our forces first. Wu Ming's words made everyone realize. Indeed, other than Wu Ming who could fight, no one here could compete with the Knights of the Round Table one-on-one. Hassan was an assassin, Da Vinci was a magician, and Matthew was a defender. There was no way they could compete with the Knights in frontal combat. My Skywing Legion can only be used as a one-time use Joker card due to Fury, so we still lack a critical force. Wu Ming said as he looked at Cursed Wrist Hassan. The critical force you are talking about, could it be? Seeing that Cursed Wrist Hassan understood what he meant, Wu Ming smiled. Yes, it's what you think. Chapter 751. Excuse me. What exactly are Senior Villo and Mr. Cursing Wrist talking about? Matthew, being a curious child, asked. And the person who answered Matthew was Hundred Faces Hassan. They should be talking about the first Hassan. However, Hundred Faces Hassan seemed to be in a bad mood at the moment, and his words were a little harsh. Yes, the key force I'm talking about is the original Hassan, the first Hassan who is known as the King of Hassan. Wu Ming nodded without delving into Hundred Faces Hassan's tone. Oh, isn't that King Hassan? Feels so cool. Gadotsi leaned forward and looked at Wu Ming with an excited look. Because the content of the previous discussion was not familiar to Hundred Faces Hassan and Cursing Wrist Hassan, the two of them did not interrupt before. But now that they were talking about things they were familiar with, Hundred Faces Hassan and Cursing Wrist Hassan began to explain to everyone. The first Hassan, that is the most mysterious Hassan. No one knows whether it is a man or a woman, and no one can catch its trace. Even the people who are targeted by the first Hassan may not be able to see it before they die. After Cursing Wrist Hassan finished speaking, everyone except Hundred Faces Hassan and Wu Ming had a surprised expression. Doesn't that mean that the first Hassan's assassination technique has reached the point of being amazing? Matthew explained his understanding. At this time on Gadotsi's bracelet, Roman and Chaldea also made a sound. Matthew's understanding is indeed correct. I checked the information and found that there are very few descriptions of the first Hassan in the information. Other than the simple founder of the Elders of the Mountain, and Hassan who killed Hassan, there are basically no other records. Ah, so mysterious? Matthew was stunned. This seemed to be a big shot. As a magician, Matthew clearly realized that the more mysterious something was, the more powerful it was. For such a mysterious first-generation Hassan, Mashu felt that the other party may be a super powerful person. Although I agree with Mashu's words, I'm more concerned about the Hassan who killed Hassan. Da Vinci suddenly said. What? Gadotsi was puzzled. We'll have to answer that question, said Cursed Wrist Hassan. Knowing that Chaldea came from the future, Hassan the All-Seeing and Cursed Wrist Hassan were not surprised that the other party knew about Hassan's secret. Following Cursed Wrist Hassan's words, Hundred Faces Hassan continued. The so-called first Hassan who kills Hassan is because the first Hassan will behead the other Hassans when they go astray. Going astray? Matthew murmured thoughtfully. Continuing Hassan's words, Cursed Wrist Hassan said again. Although that's what they say, in reality, there are very few Hassans who have been beheaded by the first generation. After all, the elders of the mountain don't act for selfish reasons, so it's unlikely that we'll be beheaded by the first generation, Hassan the All-Seeing finally added. In other words, it was basically impossible to encounter them. Then how do we find the first Hassan? Gaddafi slumped on the table looking powerless. After all, whether it was Roman's statement that the first Hassan was extremely mysterious, or Hassan the All-Seeing and Cursed-Wrist Hassan's statement that it was almost impossible to meet them, it meant that the first Hassan was not easy to find. However, the corner of Wu Ming's mouth began to twitch slightly. The first Hassan came to him and slashed him. So, we need Cursed-Wrist Hassan's help, Wu Ming said as he looked at Cursed-Wrist Hassan. At the same time, everyone followed Wu Ming's gaze and looked at Cursed-Wrist Hassan, which made Cursed-Wrist Hassan feel a little restrained. Just when Hassan the All-Seeing was about to say something, Cursed-Wrist Hassan spoke before Hassan the All-Seeing could. I do know how to find the first Hassan. Cursed-Wrist Hassan nodded. Seeing that Cursed-Wrist Hassan spoke, Hassan the All-Seeing did not say anything else. In other words, as long as it's Hassan, he will definitely know this, Cursed-Wrist Hassan continued. So, Hassan the All-Seeing also knows how to find the first Hassan? Gaddafi said, drawing inferences from one case. Yes, I can also find the first Hassan. Without any evasiveness or hesitation, Hassan the All-Seeing admitted it naturally. However, with Hassan the All-Seeing and Cursed-Wrist Hassan's admission, the previous words of, the first Hassan is difficult to find, were a little bit of a slap in the face. As soon as they said that the first Hassan was difficult to find, Wu Ming revealed that Cursed-Wrist Hassan could find the first Hassan, and Hassan the All-Seeing admitted that she could do it too. This made Gaddafi and Matthew speechless. Maybe there's something that's hard to say. Gaddafi and Matthew thought so in their hearts. Then why did Senior Villo only point out Mr. Cursed-Wrist Hassan and not Ms. Hassan the All-Seeing? Matthew raised his hand and asked. The reason is simple. Cursed-Wrist Hassan is a local, Wu Ming replied concisely. Gaddafi and Matthew could not understand this answer at all. Could it be that Hassan the All-Seeing was not a local? The local that Villo said, I'm afraid he doesn't refer to this area but to this era, Da Vinci said. Da Vinci is right because Cursed-Wrist Hassan is a person of this era. Gaddafi and Matthew looked at each other, then looked at Cursed-Wrist Hassan. Mr. Cursed-Wrist Hassan, you should be a servant, right? Although Matthew was not very powerful, he could almost perceive the identity of Cursed-Wrist Hassan. There was no doubt that he was a servant. Whether it was the spiritual form or the combat power comparable to a servant, it was solid evidence. I am indeed a servant, but this era is indeed my era, or the era not long after my death. However, Cursed-Wrist Hassan did not understand one thing. How do you know about this? Cursed-Wrist Hassan asked Wu Ming in a very respectful tone. Whether it was the powerful strength of Wu Ming that he heard from Gaddafi, or Wu Ming's ability to know Hassan's secret intelligence, Wu Ming was worthy of Cursed-Wrist Hassan's respect. Wu Ming smiled slightly and answered Cursed-Wrist Hassan's question. I know from the villagers. Cursed-Wrist Hassan and All-Seeing Hassan were stunned, and then they understood. So that's how it is. No wonder you have the assassin class adaptability. Even Da Vinci praised Wu Ming. However, not everyone understood and there were still two people who did not understand. What the hell is going on? Don't keep us guessing. Gaddafi said unhappily. Only she and Matthew could not understand and it was really uncomfortable. Cursed-Wrist Hassan gave the answer. I'm afraid it's because of the villagers' conversation. Chapter 752. The villagers' conversation? What does that mean? Gaddafi was a little puzzled. Could it be that Wu Ming had tricked the villagers? Then Wu Ming knocked her on the head. Ouch! Gaddafi shouted while holding her head. I'm not as bad as you think, Wu Ming explained. I only said that I accidentally heard about Cursed-Wrist Hassan from the villagers when I was looking for Lucius. After all, the villagers did not have any entertainment facilities and were caught in the middle of a war. They could only chat to relieve their boredom. If the person he knew was powerful and kind, then there would be a lot of people talking about him. Wu Ming happened to hear something when he was looking for Lucius in the village. Through Wu Ming's own judgment and analysis, he came to the conclusion that Cursed-Wrist Hassan was a local. I didn't ask at all. Wu Ming shrugged, indicating that he was innocent. However, Hundred-Face Hassan did not believe it. I don't think you can guess Cursed-Wrist's identity from the villagers' chatter. So she directly expressed her disbelief. However, there would always be someone who believed it. And if the person involved believed it, then the others would have nothing to say. No, Hundred-Face, there is indeed such a possibility. Cursed Wrist shook his head at Hundred Face Hassan, denying his doubts. After that, Hundred Face Hassan did not say anything. Although she was a local, she was not from East Village where Cursed Wrist Hassan was from. As the host, Cursed Wrist Hassan was more right than she was. Cursed Wrist Hassan himself knew that the villagers would talk about him from time to time, and he had inadvertently overheard the content of the discussion a few times. So, he was not surprised that Wu Ming could guess his identity. So, it's much more convenient for Hassan of this generation to lead the team to look for the first Hassan than someone who is not from this generation, isn't it? Wu Ming said as he glanced at Hundred Face Hassan. Although Wu Ming didn't have much sarcasm in Hassan's eyes, Wu Ming's glance was quite sarcastic. Umph. Out of sight, out of mind, Hassan turned his head away from Wu Ming. Seeing this, Cursed Wrist Hassan also knowingly diverted everyone's attention to the topic. Then, let me lead everyone to find the first Hassan. Hassan's body moved as if he wanted to say something, but after a slight struggle, he stopped. This was naturally reflected in Wu Ming's eyes. Coupled with Hundred Faces Hassan's hesitation and Cursed Wrist Hassan's concealment earlier, Wu Ming could tell that there must be something that was hard to say. Cursed Wrist Hassan, where can I find the first Hassan? What's the price? This question stunned everyone. The first point wasn't a big deal, but the second point was the key point. Generally speaking, this kind of thing was discovered by oneself. Why did Wu Ming ask directly? Sometimes Wu Ming still wanted to be a straightforward person. After all, being a detective was very taxing on his brain cells. In the mountains to the north, there's a Yazril temple. It's the holy land of the Hassans. Legend has it that the first Hassan has been sleeping in the temple, Cursed Wrist Hassan said, and could not help but look to the north. Hassan also spoke at this moment. Although it's a legend, we firmly believe that the first Hassan is sleeping there, Hassan said respectfully. Wu Ming nodded and then changed the topic. So what's the price? Is it sacrificing the life of the current Hassan? Wu Ming's words made Gadotsi and Matthew exclaim in amazement. After all, the contrast was too great. To ask someone for help, one had to pay with one's life. Even if it was not one's own life, but someone else's life. In the eyes of Gadotsi and Matthew, this was not allowed. Is this true, Cursed Wrist Hassan? Gadotsi shouted Cursed Wrist Hassan's name with a serious expression. Because the leader of the old men in the mountains was Hassan Sabah, he could not be addressed as Hassan Sabah. After all, there were other Hassans. Therefore, Cursed Wrist Hassan said that it was fine to call himself Cursed Wrist Hassan. That was why Gadotsi called him that. Please tell us the truth, Mr. Cursed Wrist Hassan. As a polite and cute little eggplant, Matthew added honorifics. In desperation, Cursed Wrist Hassan could only nod. It's indeed as His Excellency Villo said. To seek the help of the first Hassan, one has to pay with the life of a Hassan, and that Hassan is me, the current Hassan. Is that really the case? Gadotsi was stunned. Then how did Senior Villo know? Matthew looked at Wu Ming in confusion. I'm afraid it's because the first Hassan is the Hassan who killed Hassan. Da Vinci, who had been silent for a long time, spoke up. Da Vinci is right. In fact, you can understand it if you think about it carefully. Wu Ming nodded and motioned for Gadotsi and Matthew to think about it. The first Hassan would kill Hassan who had gone astray. If seeking the help of the first Hassan was considered going astray, then one Hassan would be killed. But the question was whether seeking the help of the first Hassan was going astray. Generally speaking, this should not be considered going astray. Matthew and Gadotsi thought so. However, the truth was sometimes so unexpected. Seeking the help of the first Hassan, in our opinion, is actually going astray. Hundred Faces Hassan regretfully stated the truth. If that's the case, if we seek the help of the first Hassan, wouldn't it be? Gadotsi said and looked at Cursed Wrist Hassan, who did not waver at all. Yes, we need to sacrifice Cursed Wrist Hassan. Hundred Faces Hassan nodded. This was also the reason why she hesitated before. In Hundred Faces Hassan's opinion, Wu Ming was already very powerful. It did not matter whether they sought the help of the first Hassan or not. However, Cursed Wrist Hassan had not seen Wu Ming's true ability, so when Wu Ming proposed to seek the help of the first Hassan, Cursed Wrist Hassan did not refuse. This is easy to handle. I have a way to solve this problem. Wu Ming smiled mysteriously. At this time, someone needed to make a statement. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other and nodded at the same time. We believe in the assassin, Senior Villo, the two said in unison. In that case, I'll believe in His Excellency Villo for once. Cursed Wrist Hassan chose to believe in Wu Ming, or rather he chose to believe in the person that Chaldea's master trusted. I also want to see what the Villo has to do. Da Vinci naturally did not need to say much. In the end, only 100 Faces Hassan was left. Since Cursed Wrist Hassan has said so, what else can I do? 100 Faces Hassan nodded helplessly. Well, since the problem is solved, let's split up. Wu Ming nodded with satisfaction. Split up. 5 doubts filled everyone's mind. Chapter 753. Assassin, do you mean you're not going to work with us? Gadotsi looked at Wu Ming with some grievance. Initially they thought they could come together, but in the end they still had to separate. I'm sorry, Tachika. I have to save Serenity Hassan, who was captured by the Holy City. After all, time is of the essence, so splitting up is the best choice. Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi apologetically. Serenity Hassan? Gadotsi repeated Wu Ming's words. She did not know there was this Hassan. Is that so? You've already asked Sir Villo to save Serenity 100 Faces. Cursed Wrist Hassan suddenly realized. This is what I asked Mr. Villo to do when I was in my village. 100 Faces Hassan explained who Serenity Hassan was and told everyone about his inference that Serenity Hassan was still alive. Because we still have compatriots to take care of, plus the place where Serenity is at is heavily guarded, we dare not act rashly for a while. Listening to Cursed Wrist Hassan's words, it seemed that he and 100 Faces Hassan had already begun to formulate a plan to rescue Serenity. And it just so happened that 100 Faces Hassan met me, so he asked me to meet Serenity Hassan. Wu Ming did not mention the misunderstanding between him and 100 Faces Hassan. He just gave a simple ending. I see. Gadotsi wasn't an unreasonable girl, so he nodded his head in understanding. I know, I will definitely complete the mission you gave me, Assassin. Assassin, you have to work hard on your side too. She clenched her little fist and cheered for Wu Ming. Don't worry, I'm Villo there answered. Nothing will happen. Wu Ming reached out his hand and gave a thumbs up to Gadotsi in the void. MMM. Gadotsi also reached out her hand and gave a thumbs up in the void with a knowing smile. Then I'll leave it to you, Your Excellency Villo. I'll provide you with the specific information. Cursed Wrist Hassan thanked him. Okay, then I'll thank you in advance. Wu Ming nodded in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Although he only needed to tell Wu Ming where the location was, Hassan also thought so he did not prepare any information for Wu Ming. However, since someone was willing to help, Wu Ming wouldn't refuse the other party's request, so he simply agreed. Then I'll be in charge of rescuing Serenity Hassan. Tachika, Matthew, and Lucius will be in charge of going to the Yazril Temple with Cursed Wrist Hassan and Baijio Hassan. That's it. Wu Ming stood up and prepared to end the meeting. How sad, my dear Villo, are you going to abandon Da Vinci just like that? Da Vinci, who wasn't assigned a mission, complained. This made Wu Ming feel somewhat helpless. You're a caster after all. It's better for you to stay here. Wu Ming smiled helplessly. And the villagers also need someone to protect them. If the servants leave, it'll be bad if there's any danger. For example, they would be discovered by the knights. After all, the West Village was still guarded by a Banti, whom Gabriel and Baijio Hassan didn't know about. As for the East Village, once they all left, then no one could provide protection for the villagers. Although Wu Ming would also let Azrael stay to protect the village secretly, Azrael was currently a secret chess piece, so he had to let one of her servants stay behind. I'm a genius. Maybe I can help. After all, climbing a mountain is very tiring. Tachika is just an ordinary human. She should need transportation, and it can also speed up. Da Vinci said a series of benefits for him to go. However, Cursed Wrist Hassan immediately refuted. Unfortunately, on the way to the Yazril Temple, you are not allowed to take transportation. That is disrespectful to the first generation. Even Da Vinci was stunned by Cursed Wrist Hassan's sudden slap in the face. The main reason was that the road between them was so rugged that many people who took transportation fell off the cliff and died because of instability. That was why this rule was extended. But if you don't want to take transportation, you can follow me. Cursed Wrist Hassan's words made Da Vinci react instantly. Okay, no problem. Da Vinci smiled and replied quickly. This made Wu Ming feel helpless. But Da Vinci didn't mind. It wouldn't affect him anyway, probably. In that case, I won't go. Mr. Villo is right. Someone has to stay behind to protect the villagers. So let me stay here to protect the villagers. At this time, Baijio Hassan suddenly spoke. After all, as long as it was Hassan, he would know where the Yazril Temple was, so only one Hassan was needed to lead everyone to the Yazril Temple. And if he was punished by the first Hassan, only Cursed Wrist Hassan, the current generation Hassan, would be punished. so it didn't matter if Baijiu Hassan went or not. However, Cursed Wrist Hassan spoke once. You don't have to worry about that. There is another servant in this village. Cursed Wrist Hassan reminded him. When Cursed Wrist Hassan said that, Baijiu Hassan understood. I forgot about that person. Because he didn't come here often and that person didn't appear in the village, Baijiu Hassan forgot about him. That person? Who is it? Wuming was puzzled because he didn't find any other servant's magical power in the village, including now. Wuming released his spirit sense and covered the entire village. Except for the servants in this house, there were no other servants in the village. You can't perceive that person's magical power because he is not in the village, dear Villo. After all, it was Castor, and Da Vinci perceived Wuming's spirit sense. Not in the village? Wuming was relieved. In that case, it was not surprising that Wuming couldn't perceive the servant's aura. That person took some villagers to the mountains to hunt today, Gadotsi said with a smile. After all, there is not much food now. That person will take the villagers to the mountains from time to hunt. Matthew echoed. Although it was a war, there were still many wild animals in the mountains. However, because of the singularity, those beasts were fierce, so they needed servants to lead the team to hunt. So, who is that person? Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This group of people just didn't say the servant's name. It was definitely a temporary idea to play with him. This was Wuming's judgment. In the end, it was the most honest, Cursed Wrist Hassan who said the servant's real name. The servant's rank is Archer, and his real name is Arash Kamengo, a great hero of the ancient Persian Empire. Chapter 754. Because he was acting alone, Wuming left first. Gadotsi and the others were going to wait for Arash, who went out to hunt with the villagers, to come back and explain before going out, so Gadotsi and the others stayed in the village. Between the mountains, Wuming used his telekinesis to fly in the air and headed south. After leaving East Village for some distance, Wuming found a mountaintop similar to a cliff and stopped. I remember that Arash is a hero who can tear the earth with an arrow, but the price seems to be the shattering of his body. Wuming thought about the information of the great hero along the way. Although Wuming could also wait for Arash to come back and meet him before leaving, there was no need for that. After all, there would be opportunities in the future. Thinking of opportunities, Wuming thought of Smoky Drunk Hassan. His first meeting with Smoky Drunk Hassan was the last meeting. At that time, Wuming also thought that there was still a chance. I'm not a jinx. Wuming shook his head self-deprecatingly. As a matter of fact, it was inevitable for Smoky Drunk Hassan to make such a decision. It was a pity that he could not see him again. Wuming had a good impression of Hassan, who was willing to sacrifice his life to stall Tristan. However, the other party had left. Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about it. Then he looked in the direction of the cliff. He sensed someone there. Azrael? After Wuming said that, an angel floated up from the bottom of the cliff. It's me, Master. The newcomer was naturally the green-haired Azrael. Azrael's special skill played a big role. So far, she had not shown any signs of losing her mind. It seemed that the ability of the Skywing commander brought about resistance to the violent power. Azrael bowed her head respectfully, her wings half spread and floated in the air, but her body was one position lower than Wuming. You've worked hard, Azrael. You've completed the task I gave you very well. After all, she was his subordinate and she was also a cute girl. Wuming naturally wouldn't be stingy with his praise. Master, are you blaming me for not saving that smoke-drunk Hassan? Azrael suddenly asked. Wuming shook his head. The death of a servant is not a real death and you did it to complete my mission. You did the right thing. Therefore, Wuming did not overreact to the death of drunk Smoke Hassan. Moreover, Azrael's actions proved that she was completely under Wuming's command. She would not try to act smart, which was similar to the NPCs in Nazalek. However, being too loyal and inflexible was also what gave Wuming a headache. Of course, I hope you can try to be flexible. When Wuming left Dongji village, he got a lot of information from drunk Smoke Hassan about a prison tower that imprisoned Tranquil Hassan. However, when handing over the information, Wuming inadvertently heard a sentence from Cursed Wrist Hassan. It would be great if Smoke Drunk didn't leave. Her stealth ability is the best among us, Hassan. It was no wonder that drunk Smoke Hassan chose to sneak into the holy city. It was not arrogance but the truth. Although the ending was that he took the initiative to expose himself and sacrificed himself to cover the refugees. At that time, Wuming actually wanted to complain. Why did drunk Smoke Hassan always want to sacrifice himself to cover others' escape? Ahem, back to the topic. If Azrael saved drunk Smoke Hassan at that time, then they would have one more stealth expert to help them. Of course, I'm not blaming you. I just hope you don't lose the right to think for yourself because you want to fully express your loyalty. Servants who needed to be loyal to a new master would generally fully obey the master's orders in order to gain the master's trust. However, there was no need for that. He believed in the loyalty of the Skywing species. A person who was loyal enough to listen to the master's orders and indirectly killed her master, and it was done knowingly. One could imagine the loyalty of the Skywing species. Azrael did think so, and she was afraid that Wuming could not see that she wanted to show her loyalty, so she deliberately showed it. I still prefer to talk to Gabriel. I like partners more than servants. Although Gabriel also gave her loyalty to Wuming, she was more casual in front of Wuming than Azrael. Well, my master, I will change, meow. Azrael flapped her wings, smiled at Wuming, and put on her quirky tone again. Then, please continue to stay here, whether in Dongji village or with Tachika and the others. This time, Wuming only gave a vague order, and it was up to Azrael to decide what to do. Master, don't you need me to go with you to carry out the rescue plan, meow? Azrael asked with concern. Although she knew that Wuming would be fine if he went alone and would definitely succeed, how could she be lazy and let her master do things for her? It's too extravagant for the two of us to go. Just complete the task I gave you. After all, Wuming was not someone who cared about his reputation. He was not someone who would let his subordinates do things first. In Wuming's opinion, splitting up to act was the most time-saving. Yes, master. May I know what little Kishi is doing now, meow? Azrael flew in front of Wuming. Although she let go, she still did not lose the respect she should have. I ordered her to monitor and protect Dongji village with a bot, Wuming answered truthfully. Protecting the village is boring. Little Kishi is probably bored out of her wits, meow. Azrael laughed gloatingly. I'm not going to stay in the village. I'm going with those monkeys, humans, to meet that first Hassan, meow. Every Skywing had a restless heart and Azrael was no exception. But be careful. While you weren't around, the first Hassan infiltrated a bot, Wuming reminded her. Master, did that first Hassan hurt you? Azrael was rather nervous. After all, in her opinion, it was her incompetence for someone to infiltrate the headquarters while she was away. After all, she was the commander of the Skywings. If her mistress was hurt, then Azrael would not tolerate it even more. I'm fine with some minor injuries, but he's not someone you can deal with, so you must be careful. Wuming looked at Azrael gravely, afraid that the first Hassan would cut down Azrael's violent temper. After all, Azrael was a berserker. Although she was not that irritable, Azrael was still easily irritable. Taking a deep breath, Azrael calmed down. Understood, master. I'll be flying high up in the sky. I'll be very cautious, meow. Smiling and bowing to Wuming, Azrael flapped her wings and flew into the sky. Then I should be going. Wuming had not been idle while chatting with Azrael. He had been using his psychic power to explore the path ahead, and he had already reached the vicinity of the prison tower. Extending his psychic power there meant that Wuming had been there, so the teleportation gate could be used. With that, Wuming snapped his fingers and a dark purple ripple engulfed Wuming. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the mountain crevices could be heard. There was no one in sight. Chapter 755. Night gradually fell and the stars surged into the sky. The moonlight tonight was not very good, and the moon was somewhat obscured by large dark clouds. On the barren land without moonlight, there was not the slightest vitality, no plants, no animals, all of it was lifeless soil, or the land that was hard and cold like iron. On this steel-like land, a black facility shaped like a prison castle was located here. The black walls merged with the dark night as if rooted in the darkness, and complemented the steel-like barren land. On the castle, mass-produced solemn knights were holding torches, patrolling the walls, monitoring the surroundings, and basically every blind spot had a solemn knight standing guard. Through the light of the fire, it could be seen that the solemn knights were all fully armed to the head, and the serious and somewhat ugly helmets could not let others see their faces clearly. The same type of armor, plus their orderly patrolling, standing guard and changing shifts, if one only looked at the appearance, it really looked like mass-produced. And mass-produced also had its advantages, that was, there would not be many accidents, and the fact was indeed so. So far, no accidents had happened here, even when the sky was dark to this extent. But this stability was about to be broken at this moment. In a corner, two knights were changing shifts. The knight who changed shifts left, and the knight who changed shifts replaced the knight who left and stood guard there. After the knight who changed shifts walked away, the knight who changed shifts fell straight back as if he had fainted. If he fell, the sound of armor hitting the ground would definitely attract the attention of others. But Wu Ming would not let this happen. Wu Ming, who was hiding in the shadow behind the unconscious knight, held the knight who was stunned by his magic release, gently lifted him, put him in the shadow of the blind spot, and gently put him on the ground. Then Wu Ming pointed in the air, and the high-level tool creation skill was activated. A black cloth appeared out of thin air and covered the knight on the ground. Because it was a blind spot, plus the shadow and Wu Ming's black cloth as a cover, it was basically impossible to be discovered. "Now I'm going to sneak in," Wu Ming said, and a black cloak like Hassan appeared on Wu Ming's body. From now on he would sneak in. It could only be said that there was still a shortage of manpower, and at least 2 knights should be arranged in the blind spot. However, there was only one solemn knight standing guard in the corner of the castle. Wasn't this giving Wu Ming an opportunity to take advantage of? At first, Wu Ming, who arrived not far from the prison castle through the portal, began to explore all kinds of intelligence about the prison castle. First of all, there was no enchantment around the prison castle. So Wu Ming easily slipped up the wall and he was ready to sneak from the top. After hiding for a while, Silent Wonder figured out how the knights would change shifts. After that knight finished changing shifts, Silent Wonder knocked out the knight and replaced him as the night sentry. According to Wu Ming's observation, the guard in this blind spot changed every half an hour. In other words, from now on, no one would pay attention to this place for at least half an hour. In other words, Wu Ming had half an hour to do whatever he wanted. Then it was time for Wu Ming to sneak in. After waiting for a while to make sure that this blind spot would not be noticed by others, Wu Ming did not stay any longer. Wu Ming directly used the high-level tool creation to create a puppet with only the appearance of the solemn knight, and the real solemn knight would not wake up for a while. Wu Ming was merciful that the guy was not shocked to death by the magic released. Without a few hours or intense stimulation, the guy would not wake up. After finishing the preparation, Wu Ming put on the black cloak and quietly left along the wall of the building. After all, there was only one entrance to the lower level, so Wu Ming naturally knew where to go. Avoiding the patrolling solemn knight, Wu Ming quietly entered from the entrance of the tower and came to a corridor that could lead to the lower level of the castle. In order to avoid being blocked in the corridor, Wu Ming used his mental power to support the soles of his feet and ran through the corridor without making the slightest sound. Because of the chaos, it was impossible for the holy city to have many people. Plus, this location was remote, so there were not many people inside the castle. At least this was what Wu Ming saw so far. At least Wu Ming did not see many solemn knights along the way. Even if he did, Wu Ming could rely on his own skills to avoid them. It had to be said that the construction of this prison castle was exactly the same as the prison castle in Camelot. Wu Ming even felt like he was back at home. Cough cough. In short, Wu Ming knew his destination. Where was the prison room where the prisoners were kept? After all, he was also a knight of the Round Table. Soon, Wu Ming came to an entrance to the lower level. Hiding in the corner, Wu Ming saw 2 solemn knights holding spears at the entrance. In front of him was the entrance where the prisoners were detained. If it was in this castle, then Quiet Hassan would be in the prison room at this entrance. After finding Quiet Hassan, Wu Ming could rely on the portal to save her. So, it was better to be reckless now. Wu Ming picked up a stone and threw it in the opposite direction where he was. The 2 solemn knights looked over subconsciously. At this moment, the mental power attached to the soles of his feet burst out suddenly. Wu Ming rushed to the 2 solemn knights like a missile. The 2 solemn knights obviously realized that something was wrong, and they also saw someone attacking them, but their body's reaction speed could not keep up with their thoughts. Wu Ming, who rushed to the front of the 2 knights in an instant, pressed his hands on the heads of the 2 solemn knights, and magic power suddenly released. What? Before one of the knights could finish speaking, he was stunned by Wu Ming's magic power. The other solemn knight, who did not have time to speak, naturally fainted earlier. Wu Ming threw the 2 solemn knights casually, and the 2 solemn knights were swallowed by the black and purple ripples. In one corner, the black and purple ripples spat out the 2 and piled them together like garbage. Looking at the adults in the prison room, Wu Ming gently patted the non-existent dust on his hands. After all, there was no need to be careful. Moreover, Wu Ming did not feel that this door was safe. On the contrary, this door was probably the most dangerous place in this prison castle. With one hand extended, the spear of the unconscious solemn knight was sucked into the palm of Wu Ming's hand with his mental power. Wu Ming held the spear and aimed at the door, and magic began to gather on this ordinary spear. Then the spear was thrown out by Wu Ming. Whoosh, boom. The entire prison castle shook violently. Chapter 756. Boom. The entire prison tower shook because of Wu Ming's throw. The solemn knights on the tower panicked a little. Although there was no commander to command them, after a moment of panic, the solemn knights automatically gathered in an orderly manner and headed toward the source of the tremor, the prison in the castle. At the door of the prison room, Wu Ming pondered and picked up the broken stone that splashed at his feet. A magic shielding enchantment. Wu Ming saw the traces of a magic enchantment attached to the broken stone. Attached to these walls were enchantments that could completely shield magic. Although this enchantment was very ordinary, it was very practical. However, this enchantment was said to shield magic, but it was more like hiding magic. When setting up a magic trap or something with this enchantment, the enemy would not be able to detect the magic on the magic trap and thus would not be able to discover the trap. Of course, to deal with a magician, non-magic traps could also be set up. To put it simply, it was a trap created by the knowledge brought about by the development of science and technology. However, such a trap was basically useless against people like Wu Ming, although magic traps were unlikely to work against Wu Ming. However, this magic shielding enchantment was not used to hide the trap. The other party knew that the trap would not be able to do anything to Wu Ming, so this enchantment was used to hide the person hiding in the prison room. Wu Ming casually threw away the broken stone in his hand and then looked at the smashed door. The door was completely broken and even the walls around the door had a lot of cracks. The broken stone that splashed at Wu Ming's feet was part of this broken wall. Wu Ming's throw accurately hit the target he wanted to hit. Although this blow caused a lot of smoke and the situation inside could not be seen clearly, Wu Ming did not need to see clearly. After breaking the door, Wu Ming extended his mental strength to see the situation inside. A large number of fully armed solemn knights, and a knight of the round table that Wu Ming was familiar with, agronoman. This was what the other party was hiding. A fully armed, battle-hardened solemn knight, as well as a knight of the round table, iron agronoman. Unlike the solemn knights on the tower outside, the armor and weapons of these solemn knights were attached to magic. If these things were called magic attire in the magic world, it would be a very advanced magic attire. Is this Guinevere's work? Not to mention that Wu Ming could recognize these things that were transformed by Guinevere. Among the knights of the round table, only Merlin, Guinevere and Morgan were high-grade magicians. Morgan and Merlin were not here, only Guinevere was here. These magic attires undoubtedly came from Guinevere's work. Although Guinevere was a berserker, it was not impossible for him to read as a berserker and write as a caster. Even Soundless was able to read Saber's assassin and infiltrate berserker, so what else was impossible? In Wu Ming's view, even Ramses II's sudden betrayal was possible. That was why Wu Ming asked Gadotsi and the others to invite the first Hassan. When Wu Ming was distracted, the sound of arrows piercing through the atmosphere came into Wu Ming's ears. Shaking his head, he pulled himself back from the distraction. Wu Ming stretched out one hand, and the meteor silver was spat out from the golden ripples and fell into Wu Ming's hand. Wu Ming held it tightly. Then Wu Ming swung his sword violently, and the magic sword aura swept across and shot down all the arrows from the prison room. By the way, Wu Ming's sword aura also blew away the surrounding smoke and dust. Wu Ming saw the inside of the prison room. This door was just the main door and there was a very empty hall inside. There was a wide corridor inside, and there were rows of prisons where prisoners were held. Wu Ming was not familiar with this structure. It must have been remodeled when the prison castle was built. The purpose was obvious, that was Wu Ming's current situation. A row of knights with bow and arrow magic attire lined up in the hall, maintaining the posture of bow and arrow. There was no doubt that the attack just now was launched by them. In the back row there was a team of knights with spears, and all of them were also wearing high-level magic attire. Behind them, there was a Gwaun in black armor, and a row of knights with a knight's greatsword. Similarly, those knights' greatsword were also magic attire. Although it was completely incomparable with Wu Ming's meteor silver, it was already a very powerful weapon for ordinary servants or humans. There was no doubt that those troops led by a Gwaun were a team of special forces. After all, even Guinevere couldn't always make magic attire for the knights, so those magic attire were very small, at least Wu Ming didn't see them in the sacred city. Although there was also the possibility that they were hidden, Wu Ming believed that this was a special force. If it was an ordinary servant, after dealing with the guard knights, they would definitely enter the prison to save people. In that case, the first wave of arrows just now was likely to be unstoppable. Of course, if you had a blood-stained armor, an invincible golden armor, an immortal demigod body or something like that, you could naturally resist the attack. However, Wu Ming didn't go in at all. The number of people in the prison castle was pitifully small, and the defense was very similar to a trap. How could there not be an ambush? If someone didn't know about the Knights of the Round Table, they might think that the number of people patrolling the castle was quite normal, but as a member of the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming had already seen that something was wrong. He didn't know about other knights, but among the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming knew that the prison was not strictly guarded, but it was impossible to arrange such a number of people. What's more, there were servants here. Even if the terrain was remote, it was impossible to send so many people. Therefore, only by setting up an ambush in Wu Ming's view was the most correct answer. However, that was just Wu Ming's guess, but the javelin just now proved that what he thought was correct. He didn't know whether a Guoan got the news or guessed that someone would come to save people. Anyway, he had already set up an ambush in advance. If it was Hassan, maybe he would be buried under this special force, but unfortunately, the person who came today was Wu Ming. Vilo Theranciat. A Guoan frowned. Through his expression, Wu Ming could see that he really didn't expect the person who came was Wu Ming. In other words, the information collected by Hassan was actually deliberately leaked by a Guoan, waiting for Hassan to fall into the trap. Again, it was Wu Ming who came today. As a result, a Guoan's plan was completely disrupted. Chapter 757. It was not that Wu Ming was bragging. Even if these knights were equipped with the powerful magic attire made by Guinevere, they were still no match for Wu Ming. Learning martial arts from the Queen of the Infernal Realm, honing his martial arts skills for more than 10 years, or even decades, as well as powerful noble phantasm and unimaginable magic power, Aguin and his special troops were nothing more than decorations. If it were not for the fact that Wu Ming did not know if the target he needed to rescue this time, Quiet Hassan, was there, Wu Ming would definitely use the meteor silver to launch a light cannon. In that case, these solemn nights would basically be finished. It could not be helped. A sealed hall with an opening was like a secret room, and if Wu Ming released his noble phantasm at the opening, it was equivalent to a bomb exploding in the secret room. Wu Ming's bomb was not an ordinary bomb. If Wu Ming completely released his noble phantasm, it would be a bomb on the level of a nuclear bomb. The result would be that the prison castle would be directly shattered, and not even dregs would be left. However, Wu Ming did not know if the target he needed to rescue this time was still in the prison castle, so Wu Ming would not do that. Moreover, Wu Ming sneaked in, so how could he make such a big movement like a nuclear bomb explosion? Wu Ming looked at Aguin's appearance, and it did not seem like he was going to turn a blind eye. However, after all, both of them were once colleagues at the Round Table, so Wu Ming would not immediately make a move. "I didn't expect to see you here, Aguin." Wu Ming took the lead in greeting. When the solemn knights saw Wu Ming greeting their commander, they all looked at each other. It was someone they knew, so should they still attack? The king's order has already been issued. Vilo Theranced is the enemy. You don't have to hold back, Aguin said with a gloomy face. The solemn knights did not know Wu Ming, so they did not have any definite feeling about Wu Ming's identity as a former knight of the Round Table. Therefore, after Aguin gave the order, the solemn knights at the forefront with bows and arrows immediately released their fully drawn bows and arrows. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the arrows cut through the air and rushed at Wu Ming at an extremely fast speed. However, all of this was useless. Wu Ming just gently waved his sword, and all the arrows that attacked Wu Ming were all deflected. Tisk. Aguin gritted his teeth and frowned. He naturally knew that these solemn knights were no threat to Wu Ming, but he still did not want to give up. Because he was unwilling. All of you stand down. But what could he do? If this continued, these special solemn knights would be completely annihilated. And as long as they did not attack Wu Ming, according to Aguin's understanding of Wu Ming, he would not attack. The solemn knights completely obeyed Aguin's order and immediately stood up and retreated. However, Aguin did not move. But it was clear that he did not want to sit down and have a good talk with Wu Ming, because Aguin pulled out his sword. There was no doubt that the solemn knights could not deal with Wu Ming, so Aguin was ready to personally attack. The solemn knights were a special force trained by Aguin to deal with servants. They could not be defeated by Wu Ming, so Aguin chose to let them retreat. But he could not retreat because Aguin's anger toward Wu Ming was burning fiercely. "It seems that you are not ready to have a good talk with me." Wu Ming shook his head regretfully. Although it was futile for Aguin to personally attack, Not to mention that Aguin's face was full of anger at the moment. But as a knight, Wu Ming respected Aguin's choice. So Wu Ming also raised his sword, Meteor Silver. Without saying much, Aguin made the first move. It was a powerful slash, which gave people the feeling that Aguin was not a knight but a berserker. Wu Ming received the attack. Aguin's attack was indeed powerful, but Wu Ming was stronger. However, Wu Ming did not attack, but used Meteor Silver to constantly defend. Bang, bang, bang. Aguin held his sword and kept attacking. Wu Ming used Meteor Silver to constantly defend. One moved forward, the other moved backward. The two swords collided with each other and made a sound. What made you so angry, Aguin? Wu Ming asked while defending. Of course it's you. Vilo tharanced. Aguin roared, raised his sword and slashed at Wu Ming with more force than before. Clang! The sound of metal colliding rose by dozens of decibels, and Wu Ming felt a little uncomfortable. On the other hand, Aguin's ear was slightly bleeding. Whether it's Guy, Gaholis, Miranduke or Percival, they can all betray the king but only you. The king's closest knight. Vilo tharanced. Only you can't betray the king. Aguin seemed a little crazy at this moment, like a berserker. You are the one who has been with the king since the beginning. The person the king needs the most is none other than you. But you betrayed the king. Aguin's mind was becoming more and more abnormal. His words were filled with respect for Wu Ming, but also resentment for Wu Ming. Wu Ming sighed. He understood why Aguin became like this. Artoria was indeed the first person that a grouping got close to, and he was greatly influenced by her. However, because he was a modern person, he showed a lot of advanced ideas. Therefore, Wu Ming's influence on a grouping was also great. Aguin was extremely loyal to Artoria, but he also admired Wu Ming. As everyone knew, the Knights of the Round Table were fans of Artoria, but at the same time they were also fans of Wu Ming or Vilo tharanced. The other Knights of the Round Table were very obvious, but there were also some who were not. Aguin was such an example. However, if he had to choose between Wu Ming and Artoria, Aguin would undoubtedly choose Artoria's side. But this did not mean that he could turn a blind eye to the person he admired, especially when that person was the person the king he was loyal to needed. And now, the two people he admired and believed in were standing on opposite sides. How could he not go crazy? You need to calm down, Aguin, Wu Ming said. After all, they were good friends who had worked together for many years. Wu Ming naturally cared about the Knights of the Round Table. Aguin's eyes were bloodshot, and his ears were bleeding. He roared at Wu Ming, I am calm. Those who are not loyal to the king are traitors. Even if it's Lord Varen, I'll kill him for you to see. With that, Aguin rushed forward again. Seeing Aguin like this, Wu Ming did not say anything. Now he could only defeat him. Chapter 758. Excliver. Following the activation of True Name release, the blade of Meteor Silver glowed with a pure silver light. The huge amount of magic power caused the solemn knights not far away to feel fear. The mana released from his body was instantly compressed and condensed on the holy sword. Like a flash bomb, no one could look directly at it. Wu Ming swung the holy sword horizontally at Aguin who was attacking him. Light flashed and Aguin's knight sword shattered. Even Agaroan's armor was completely shattered. Pfft. Aguin coughed out blood and half knelt in front of Wu Ming. Wu Ming did not kill Aguin. He could not and did not need to. Wu Ming also half knelt and looked at Aguin. If I accept Artoria's summon, you will lose. I will lead Guy and the others to defeat Artoria. Wu Ming looked at Aguin with bloodshot eyes and messy hair. He looked like he was about to die. Ahem. Aguin was a little agitated by Wu Ming and coughed twice. Aguin understood what Wu Ming meant. He was saying that it was unwise for Aguin to fight him alone. Wu Ming was the strongest among the Knights of the Round Table. Although Gawain and Lancelot could fight against Wu Ming, they were still no match for him. No matter in terms of strength, speed, durability or magic power, the other Knights of the Round Table were no match for Wu Ming who was the Origin Dragon. Although it didn't have any obvious advantages, the Origin Dragon gave Wu Ming an inconspicuous change that transcended nature. However, Wu Ming's words also implied that he would drag Artoria down from the Lion King's throne. I didn't try to kill you, but you can't fight right now. You should take a good rest. Wu Ming stood up and walked around Agaroan. When Wu Ming arrived behind Aguin suddenly spoke. Wait a minute. Due to his weak state, Aguin could not turn his head. He could only lower his head and ask. Wu Ming turned around and looked at Aguin. Lord Villo? Why do you want to make an enemy out of my king? However, Wu Ming only smiled at this. I never said that I want to be Artoria's enemy. I just don't want Artoria to walk on a difficult path. In her current form, Artoria chose to preserve the human specimens and destroy the villains for the sake of mankind. No matter the Knights of the Round Table, such as Guy, who chose to stand against Artoria, or the Knights of the Round Table who chose to stand on Artoria's side as a knight, they were against the idea of eliminating the majority and protecting the minority. However, the knights who chose to stand on Artoria's side, such as Gawain, did so out of loyalty. Compared to protecting the people, serving the king and making up for their regrets was a better choice. Therefore, King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table became the Lion King's Knights of the Round Table. Purely from the perspective of protecting the people, Artoria chose the right path. However, Wu Ming had a better choice. This choice was better for both Artoria and the people. Helping Chaldea and restoring the people was Wu Ming's choice. The path of saving the people was finished by him. There was no need for Artoria to bear the burden. If there was a happy ending, why would he choose the path of bad end? Therefore, Wu Ming stood on the opposite side of the Lion King as an ally. Didn't you say that the person Artoria needs the most is me? Therefore, I will never betray her. I just chose to walk on the path of betrayal in your eyes. However, more importantly, Wu Ming had to find out what Artoria was hiding from him. Of course, the premise of all this was that Ramses II did not lie. By the way, the new force is mine. Soon we will launch an attack on the holy city. Be prepared, Agronomen. After saying that, Wu Ming walked into the prison. As for Agronomen, after hearing Wu Ming's words, he fainted and lay on the ground. The knights were afraid of Wu Ming because of Wu Ming's previous performance. In addition, their commander, Agronomen, had fainted. Therefore the knights did not move. They were even a little scared. Seeing such knights, Wu Ming shook his head helplessly. Send Agronomen back to the holy city. Tell him that you met me. The Lion King will not blame you. Yes. The knights responded. Then, they carried the unconscious Agronomen and hurriedly left in the direction of the gate. Wu Ming shook his head again. He was disappointed with these knights. Although it was irrational to fight against an enemy who was obviously unbeatable, listening to Wu Ming, who seemed to be an enemy at the moment, was there something wrong? However, Wu Ming did not think too much about it. What he needed to do now was to save Quiet Hassan. Walking to the prison corridor, Wu Ming did not find anyone in the cells on both sides of the corridor, but after thinking about it carefully, the villains must have been killed. Judging from the magic emitted by the prison facilities here, it was estimated that this place was only used to imprison servants. I forgot to ask where Quiet Hassan is. Wu Ming made a mistake. However, the felons should be in the innermost part. With that in mind, Wu Ming walked to the deepest part of the prison corridor. A two-person tall door appeared in front of Wu Ming. Without hesitation, Wu Ming pushed the door and walked in. As soon as he entered, he saw a huge cylindrical pit, but the depth of the huge pit was not high, but the diameter was quite long. A stone staircase spiraled down the edge of the huge pit. It seemed to be a staircase leading to the bottom. However, because it was not deep, Wu Ming saw the bottom at a glance. In the center of the bottom, a wooden cross stood there which was used to tie people up. On the cross, a scarred body was hung on it. It was a purple-haired girl wearing a tight black suit and a skull mask. That should be Quiet Hassan. Wu Ming thought so. With a light leap, Wu Ming jumped down from the huge pit and landed steadily in front of Quiet Hassan. Quiet Hassan did not move at all, but Wu Ming was still keenly aware that a gaze was looking at him, but it immediately moved away. Wu Ming looked at his armor. He was afraid that Quiet Hassan thought he was a knight of the holy city. He touched the armor and changed into ordinary Middle Eastern clothes, then Wu Ming spoke. I'm here to save you on Hassan's request. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Quiet Hassan's eyes lit up. Later, Wu Ming waved the meteor silver, and the chain wrapped around Quiet Hassan broke, and Quiet Hassan fell from the cross. Wu Ming subconsciously reached out and hugged Quiet Hassan. However, at this moment, Quiet Hassan squeezed out a trace of strength and spoke weakly. No. Chapter 759. But to be honest, if it weren't for Wu Ming's good ears and being close enough to Quiet Hassan, Wu Ming might not have been able to hear Quiet Hassan's words. Such a weak and incomparably weak voice, coupled with the injuries on Quiet Hassan's body, it seemed that Quiet Hassan was tortured by Aghdadi. As for Quiet Hassan's no, Wu Ming naturally knew why. Cursed Wrist Hassan had given Wu Ming information that Quiet Hassan's entire body was highly toxic. whether it was his skin, hair, or even body fluids. Ordinary people would die as soon as they touched him, and even servants might not be able to resist Quiet Hassan's poison. Therefore, Cursed Wrist Hassan told Wu Ming that he should not easily come into contact with Quiet Hassan. However, as the root dragon, Wu Ming was naturally not afraid of any poison, even if it was the body of a servant. Otherwise, why would Wu Ming cheat on the body of a servant? However, Quiet Hassan was also a girl. Since she said no, Wu Ming would not force her. Spirit power was launched, and Quiet Hassan was suspended in the air at a very close distance from Wu Ming. Sigh. Quiet Hassan was obviously puzzled by his current state. Don't be afraid, this is my ability, Wu Ming said, spreading his hands, and his body naturally flew up, just like Quiet Hassan. The embodiment of spirit power is a good choice to control the flight of objects. Oh, Quiet Hassan was a little overwhelmed. He didn't know if it was because he was too weak, but Quiet Hassan seemed a little absent-minded. By the way, I'm not afraid of your poison, Wu Ming finally emphasized. Huh. Quiet Hassan was taken aback, but then he returned to normal. Maybe he has the ability to resist poison, but in the face of my poison, I'm afraid it won't have much effect. Quiet Hassan thought so and finally dispelled the fantasy in his mind. Were you really invited here by Baitsu? Immediately after, Quiet Hassan asked. After all, when Wu Ming came in, Quiet Hassan clearly saw that Wu Ming was wearing the Holy City's armor, and it was not mass-produced, but similar to the unique armor of the Knights of the Round Table. Moreover, it was always right to be cautious. As an assassin, Quiet Hassan would naturally be more cautious. He would not completely trust someone just because someone came to save him, unless the other party could resist his poison. Thinking of this, Quiet Hassan's heart hesitated. If what he said before, not afraid of my poison, was true, then to believe him. While Hassan was deep in thought, Wu Ming spoke. I am indeed a member of the Knights of the Round Table, but I am not a Knight of the Lion King. I am a Knight of King Arthur Vero Cyrus Ed. Wu Ming did not want to hide it because there was no need to, so Wu Ming calmly told Quiet Hassan his true identity. Lion King. King Arthur. Quiet Hassan carefully read the meaning of Wu Ming's words. In the end, Quiet Hassan chose to believe Wu Ming. After all, there was no other choice at the moment. She did not believe that Wu Ming could do anything. If the other party was a bad guy, with her current state and the other party's means of moving her without touching her, she was already a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. And if the other party was a good guy, then Quiet Hassan had no worries. Thank you for your trust, I will take you back to the village of the mountain people. However, at this moment, a voice full of Buddhism sounded. That benefactor over there, can you save me while you're at it? This voice was a woman's voice, and it sounded like she had been hungry for several days. Wu Ming looked at the source of the voice. It was a small prison carved out of the surrounding stone walls. Not only there, but there were also many small prisons carved out in other parts of the surrounding stone walls. The Buddha-like voice was the person in the prison that Wu Ming looked at. However, because the surroundings were too dark, Wu Ming could not see the appearance of the person locked inside. Who is locked in there? Wu Ming looked at Quiet Hassan subconsciously. After all, Quiet Hassan was an old person here, so naturally he knew more about the prisoners in the prison than Wu Ming. However, to Wu Ming's regret, Quiet Hassan did not know either. I'm not very sure, I only know that the person was caught by Agmaguyen a few days ago. Well, let me introduce myself. I'm a monk, Sanzang. As if hearing the conversation between Wu Ming and Quiet Hassan, the person who asked for help began to introduce himself. Sanzang. Wu Ming was taken aback. The only person who could be called Sanzang was the sorcerer who took 3 apprentices and rode the white dragon horse to the west to pray for scriptures. Tang Sanzang? Wu Ming asked. That's right, that's me. Tang Sanzang was so excited that he suddenly threw himself on the iron frame of the prison and looked at Wu Ming and Quiet Hassan with a hopeful look. A girl with long straight black hair and big breasts wearing a monk's robe, a monk's hat, and holding a monk's staff appeared in front of Wu Ming. Wu Ming was shocked and screamed. Are you Tang Sanzang? Wu Ming knew that Tang Sanzang was a male monk. Even if he knew that Tang Sanzang in this world was a woman through the voice just now, Wu Ming couldn't imagine that Tang Sanzang in this world was a beautiful girl with big breasts. A beautiful girl was still within the scope of understanding. After all, legend had it that Tang Sanzang's flesh could be immortal, so it was understandable that it could nourish oneself and make oneself a beautiful girl. However, no matter what, she should be a shaved head and dressed conservatively. Wu Ming even suspected that the monsters on the road to the west did not want to catch Tang Sanzang because of her immortality, but because of her beauty. Then were the 3 apprentices of Tang Sanzang also? Well, can you help me out? Tang Sanzang smiled awkwardly. Shaking his head, Wu Ming shook his head to get rid of his thoughts, and waved the meteor silver. Ka-dash, the prison that trapped Tang Sanzang instantly shattered. Great, I'm saved. Tang Sanzang exhaled a long breath and walked out with his staff. Amitabha, thank you for saving my life, benefactor. Tang Sanzang uttered a Buddhist name, his palm vertical, and bowed to Wu Ming. Master Sanzang, you don't have to be so courteous. I wonder why you are imprisoned here. After all, he was a Tang dynasty great master, and Wu Ming was still very polite. However, just as Tang Sanzang was about to answer Wu Ming, the whole prison suddenly exploded. Boom! Chapter 760. A few kilometers away from the prison castle, the solemn knights lined up neatly. Aguin, who was originally unconscious, had also woken up at this moment and was standing in front of the solemn knights. However, even if he woke up, Aguin's appearance and state were still not good. His messy hair was mixed with blood, his pale face, coupled with broken armor, he looked very embarrassed and weak. But even so, Aguin still stood straight, watching the series of explosions in the prison castle at this moment. After all, such a big castle without special means, it was impossible to blow it up in an instant. Let's meet again in the holy city Villo. There was no doubt that the big explosion in the prison castle was Aguin's masterpiece. Aguin's face was gloomy, he waved his hand, and the solemn knights set off in the direction of the holy city. Aguin, on the other hand, was knocked out again by the solemn knights. After a while the explosion in the prison castle ended, the whole prison castle turned into ruins, and even some places were burning, which was particularly conspicuous in the dark night. Behind a big stone around the ruins, the figures of Wu Ming's trio appeared. Except for Tang Sanzang's clothes, which were a bit messy, purely because of the shock, no one had the slightest damage, even Wu Ming's clothes were clean. Tang Sanzang breathed a sigh of relief, patted his huge chest, and looked like he had survived a disaster. It really scared me, I thought I was really going to see Buddha this time. However, Tang Sanzang had already gone to see Buddha, otherwise, it was impossible for him to appear in the form of a servant. Although this great wizard seemed to be powerless, he was indeed a caster servant. Thank you for saving this poor monk's life again, Tang Sanzang said, looked at Wu Ming behind him and bowed again. It's nothing. Wu Ming nodded. When the explosion occurred, Wu Ming immediately used the portal to teleport Tang Sanzang, Quiet Hassan, and himself here. Then Wu Ming looked at the prison castle that had turned into ruins and walked over. Aguin must have buried a large amount of gunpowder under the prison. Wu Ming checked the traces of the explosion. Although Wu Ming had never seen gunpowder before, he could still make a simple guess. It was mainly made up of non-mystical weapons such as explosives, supplemented by mystical means such as magic. That was why Wu Ming did not discover the explosives buried under the prison castle. After all, if it was just a simple magic explosive, Wu Ming would have sensed it the moment it got close to the prison castle. However, thanks to ordinary explosives, Wu Ming wouldn't be killed by such an explosion. Aguin seemed to be aware of this, which was why he muttered to himself, "See you again in the holy city." From the looks of it, there were only 2 reasons for the explosion in the prison castle. Firstly, he wanted to destroy the information here. Secondly, he wanted to leave some harsh words to Wu Ming before he left. Although Wu Ming and the others were not affected, Wu Ming still felt that it was a pity. I wanted to see if there were any other servants in the prison. After all, if there was a good servant he could pull it over as a helper or something. As a result, this trip to rescue Quiet Hassan saved a powerless Tang Sanzang. By the way, my apprentice is also locked in this prison. Tang Sanzang seemed to be inspired by Wu Ming and suddenly shouted. Wu Ming was a little helpless. Only now did you remember that your apprentice was locked in here. I'm afraid she has been blown back to the martyr's palace. Wu Ming felt that Tang Sanzang had no dignity for him at all, and there was no need to respect such a girl with the title of Tang Dynasty Great Mage. Tang Sanzang also realized his problem, so he smiled awkwardly. After all, I'm really hungry. It's not easy to support myself and talk to the benefactor. However, Wu Ming was concerned about the apprentice mentioned by Tang Sanzang. The apprentice you are talking about shouldn't be the great sage, heaven's equal, martial canopy, and the curtain-lifting general. Then the holy city might have been destroyed long ago? Well, yes, it's not Wukong. That apprentice is my new apprentice in this world. Tang Sanzang nodded naturally. Then Tang Sanzang had a regretful expression. If he was still here, we wouldn't have to starve. After all this time, it was still a matter of whether they were hungry or not. But when it came to the issue of hunger, Wu Ming looked at Quiet Hassan, who was leaning against a huge stone. She had not spoken since leaving the prison castle. Wu Ming could see that she was actually hungry. "I'm not hungry," Quiet Hassan said weakly. Grumble? However, Quiet Hassan's stomach betrayed her, which made Quiet Hassan blush. Of course, because she was wearing a mask, Wu Ming couldn't see it, but through Quiet Hassan's subconscious lowering of her head, Wu Ming could almost guess it. "I don't blame you. During the time when you were held captive, you must have been worried about your next meal. If you don't give them food, they will starve to death. Don't doubt it. After all, the masterless followers also relied on food to replenish their magic power. Without food for a long time, they will also die. However, their death would only bring them back to the martyr's palace. However, giving them too much food would not be conducive to interrogation. So Wu Ming guessed that during the time when Quiet Hassan was captured, she must not have eaten a good meal. The interrogation and lack of food caused Quiet Hassan's body to be so weak. Of course, Tang Sanzang was fine. It was purely because she had been imprisoned for too short a time. Quiet Hassan had said before that Tang Sanzang had just been imprisoned for a few days. Wu Ming waved one hand, and a golden ripple appeared beside Wu Ming. This startled her, for fear that Wu Ming would do something to her. "Don't be afraid, this is my noble artifact." Wu Ming comforted Quiet Hassan, and then the golden ripple spat out a tube of red potion. Reaching out to catch the potion, Wu Ming handed it to Quiet Hassan. "This is a healing potion to restore vitality. Drink it." It had to be said that the game was a bug compared to reality, such as resurrection. The most common healing potion in the game also had extraordinary abilities. Vitality was not something that could be healed when injured, but the loss of vitality was not so easy to repair. However, the game's health potion was able to do so easily. The most amazing thing was that it could even repair the broken clothes on the body. Of course, the premise was that the clothes on the body were not strong armor. However, Quiet Hassan did not take Wu Ming's potion. To put it simply, Tranquil Hassan was still vigilant. Seeing Tranquility Hassan like this, Wu Ming shook his head helplessly. Then Wu Ming walked to Tranquility Hassan. Under Tranquility Hassan's incredulous gaze, Wu Ming pulled Tranquility Hassan's hand and placed the potion in her hand. Chapter 761. Like I said, I'm not afraid of your poison. Wu Ming said calmly, as if he was not poisoned at all. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming continued to speak. If I have evil intentions, I don't need to trick you to drink the potion at all. Wouldn't it be better to force it on you? After all, after being able to ignore Quiet Hassan's poison, Quiet Hassan could be said to be completely unable to compete with Wu Ming. Quiet Hassan looked blankly at his wrist that was grabbed by Wu Ming and Wu Ming's hand that grabbed his wrist, then looked at the potion in his palm and was in a daze. Drink it, this potion can not only heal injuries, but also alleviate hunger. As soon as he finished speaking, Wu Ming heard a hee-hee sound from behind him. Can you give me a tube too, hee-hee-hee? Tang Sanzang smiled and looked at Wu Ming. After all, she was also hungry. It didn't matter to her whether it could increase vitality or not. After all, she was a big piece of meat. For Tang Sanzang, being able to fill his stomach was the most important thing. Just as he was about to take out another tube of health potion from the golden ripples that had not yet closed, the sound of stones rolling came. Walalalo dash. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming discovered the servant's reaction. Who is it? Wu Ming raised his meteor silver and pointed it to the side of the ruins of the prison castle. The sound of stones rolling came from there, and the servant's magic power that Wu Ming discovered also came from there, and it was a servant that Wu Ming had never seen before. Wait a minute. At this time, Tang Sanzang suddenly shouted. Is it Fuda? Fuda? Wu Ming frowned. The name sounded like a name from Japan. The Tang dynasty's great mage received a Japanese apprentice in the Middle East. Although it was a bit awkward, of course the other party was a servant after all. It was understandable to be able to experience such an encounter across time and space. I didn't expect this prison to explode. A man with green hair and a ponytail walked out from the shadows. He was carrying a bag of Japanese rice. Although he sounded relaxed, the tattered clothes and armor on his body, as well as the bloodstains and injuries on his body, made it clear that he must have gone through some adventure to survive the explosion of the prison castle. Great. Ting Tai, it's great that you're all right. Tang Sanzang seemed very excited. It seemed like her disciple was still very important to her. Then quickly use your rice bag to cook for your master. Your master is already very hungry. Wu Ming sighed. As expected of Master Sanzang. However, the bag of rice was quite big. If there was rice in it, it should be enough to last for many days. I want to, but this little brother doesn't seem to trust me. The man named Ting Tai scratched the back of his head and looked at Wu Ming with a headache. This was because Wu Ming was still pointing his sword at Ting Tai. After all, I still can't judge whether you are Tang Sanzang's disciple. In other words, Wu Ming suspected that the other party was in disguise. After all, the person in charge here was a Greco. If he had a servant who could change into others, it might be true. After all, it was a Greco. Although it was impossible to survive the big explosion just now, Wu Ming still remembered what Tang Sanzang said before. Her disciple was also locked in this prison, that is to say, the other party escaped the big explosion while being imprisoned. The probability of being able to escape while being trapped is too low. Regarding this, I have evidence to prove that I escaped from the prison. It seemed that he saw Wu Ming's intention. The man named Ting Tai turned around and began to move the stone. Quiet Hassan and Tang Sanzang were at a loss. The two of them couldn't understand what Ting Tai was doing. With the sound of the stone moving, a fragrance came to everyone's nose. It smells so good. Quiet Hassan suddenly had a big appetite. The fragrance of rice? On the contrary, Tang Sanzang recognized what this fragrance was for the first time. It gave people the feeling that they often ate it. Wu Ming, on the other hand, was flabbergasted. First of all, how did he make the rice in an instant? Where did he get it from? Wu Ming took a closer look. In the cracks of the ruins, under the stone fragments, there was a lot of cooked rice. The man named Ting Tai just moved the stone that pressed the rice, which let the fragrance of the rice pass into the nose of the three people. This must be the rice produced by your noble phantasm, Ting Tai. Tang Sanzang, who also came over, analyzed. A noble phantasm that produces rice? Wu Ming was stunned. This was a bit interesting. Rice, rice bag, Ting Tai, Japan, there were keywords. If Alice was here, she should be able to analyze who the servant in front of her was in an instant. There was no way. Wu Ming could not bear to read so many books, so he simply took the opportunity to transfer a large number of books to Alice's database. After all, Alice was Wu Ming's gift. The possibility of separation was very low, so Wu Ming was so relieved. However, who would have thought that Gidea's strength was somewhat beyond Wu Ming's expectation? Or Wu Ming did not expect that the other party would detonate the black mud, and wanted to kill Wu Ming. When he thought of this, Wu Ming remembered that his body was still in the Hakata world. I have to hurry up. Whether it was the repair of the singularity or the journey to find the body in the Hakata world, he had to hurry up. Let me introduce myself. My real name is Itu Ting Tai and my class is Archer. The rice is produced by my noble phantasm, the endless rice bag. The man whose real name was Itu Ting Tai said while patting the Japanese rice bag he was carrying. As for how Itu Ting Tai survived, looking at the rice in the stone ruins, he must have used the endless rice as a defensive means to substantially resist the explosion. Sure enough, food was the greatest. Of course, if you still don't believe me, then look at this. Itu Ting Tai said as he put the rice bag he was carrying on the ground and opened the lid. In an instant, rice swarmed out of the rice bag. Wah! Itu Ting Tai, don't waste the food, Tang Sanzang shouted and rushed in front of the rice bag, trying to pick up the rice scattered on the ground. I believe you. Seeing this scene, Wu Ming nodded and put the meteor silver into the golden ripple. Although Wu Ming did not know the man whose real name was Itu Ting Tai, he should be the one who could use this noble phantasm called the endless rice bag. Thank you for your trust. Itu Ting Tai laughed, then covered the rice bag and put it back on his shoulder. So, Master Sanzang and Itu Ting Tai, do you have any plans next? Chapter 762. My original plan was to wander around and explore the local customs. However, I don't think I'll be able to do that, Tang Sanzang said regretfully. Putting aside the fact that this singularity was on the verge of destruction, Tang Sanzang had already been captured once. She did not dare to wander around. What if she was captured by the people of the holy city again? If possible, I'd like to find a place to stay. Katenkta scratched his head, looking simple and honest. However, that's not possible. After all, this world doesn't seem to be able to hold on any longer, Tang Sanzang said seriously. Wu Ming was taken aback. Master Sanzang, can you feel the collapse of this singularity? Tang Sanzang nodded matter-of-factly. Of course I can feel it. This world is very similar to the aura I felt in the Great Tang. Wu-ming was enlightened. This meant that Tang Sanzang's background in obtaining the Western scripture was not as simple as it seemed. However, that had nothing to do with Wu-ming. What Wu-ming needed to do now was to pull these two to his side. After all, there was strength in numbers, right? I'm currently helping the Master of Chaldea save this singularity. Are you interested in helping? I don't have any combat ability. Are you sure you want me to join? Tang Sanzang looked embarrassed. Tang Sanzang had no intention of refusing, but he had a clear understanding of his own combat ability. I don't really like fighting either. If possible, I'd prefer to study food, Katengta said. That's not a problem. Master Sanzang can stay in the village of the mountain people, and Katengta can also act as the village's guard. He'll be responsible for the safety of Master Sanzang and the villagers. However, the village of the mountain people is rather secluded, and there won't be any danger, Wu-ming suggested. Katengta nodded, but he did not make a decision immediately. Instead, he looked at Tang Sanzang. Then I'll leave this to my master, Master Sanzang. Meh. What a headache, Tang Sanzang shook his head. He did not seem to be good at making decisions. Even so, Tang Xuanzang seemed to have made his decision long ago. Alright, who asked you to save our lives? I'll bring Ting Tai and join your team. Thank you for joining us. Wu-ming smiled and nodded. No matter when, it was not a mistake to gather people, so Silent Wonder was happy to have two servants in the team. Although Master Sanzang could only be used as a spectator. Good. Then you are my second disciple. Tang Xuanzang looked very happy. Wu-ming, on the other hand, looked confused. What was going on? Beside Tang Sanzang, Idafuta revealed an expression that said, I knew it would turn out like this. Could it be that Yuding Tai was also like Wu-ming and was randomly taken in as a disciple by Tang Xuanzang? Although Idata had confusedly admitted that Tang Sanzang was his master, Idata still called Tang Sanzang Mage Sanzang. Therefore, the possibility of Wu-ming's guess was very high. Well, as long as you are happy, Master Sanzang. Wu-ming shrugged his shoulders. Anyway, he would not lose a piece of meat. Tang Sanzang could call him whatever he wanted. What does Quiet Hassan think? Wu-ming looked at Quiet Hassan. Although he came to save Quiet Hassan this time, he was a local. He had to ask Quiet Hassan's opinion even if it was just for show. It's up to you. Quiet Hassan looked hesitant. This made Wu-ming confused again. Why are they all so strange? He shook his head and stopped thinking about these messy things. There's no time to lose, let's go. After that, Wu-ming opened the portal. Wu-ming, Quiet Hassan, Tang Sanzang and Idafuta went in. In the blink of an eye, Wu-ming and the other three disappeared in place, leaving only the ruins of the prison castle and a little fire, flickering in the darkness. On the other side of the portal was the house of Gadatsi and others. Because they were going to the Yazril temple, there was no one here now. Wow, this is really amazing. Tang Sanzang, who was the first to walk out of the portal, commented on Wu-ming's portal. But the color doesn't look very comfortable. Although the color is not very good, this ability is really interesting. Idafuta was also interested in Wu-ming's portal. It's just a little trick, Wu-ming said modestly. Then Wu-ming glanced at Quiet Hassan. Because he had drunk the potion given by Wu-ming, Quiet Hassan had recovered a lot at the moment, and walking was not a problem at all. This is the residence of the Master of Chaldea. You can rest here now, Wu-ming said to the three of them. I'm so hungry, Idafuta, cook for me. Tang Sanzang looked directly at Idafuta. It can't be helped. Wu-ming hasn't given Tang Sanzang health potion yet, so Tang Sanzang is still hungry. Yes, Master Sanzang, I'll cook now, I'll borrow the kitchen. Idafuta said and walked out of the room to look for the kitchen. At this time it was the middle of the night, and Wu-ming had no other tasks, so he simply wanted to ask Tang Sanzang some things in his spare time. Master Sanzang, have you been to the holy city? Tang Sanzang, who was preparing to travel to various places here, has naturally been to the holy city. Of course I have been there, and it was not long ago. Suddenly, Tang Sanzang thought of something. By the way, I seem to have been caught by His Excellency Aguawan not long after I left the holy city. Tang Sanzang smiled embarrassedly. But this is strange, why didn't he catch Tang Sanzang when she was still in the holy city? And Quiet Hassan, who sat down with Wu-ming and Tang Sanzang, raised a question. Why didn't he catch you when you were still in the holy city? The reason why he didn't do anything to me in the holy city is that, although my thoughts are different from those of the holy city, the Lion King didn't think I was a threat, so he let me leave the holy city. After thinking for a while, Tang Sanzang continued to speak. Maybe His Excellency Aguawan acted without authorization. It was because he hid it from the Lion King that a Guoan detained Tang Sanzang in the hidden prison where Quiet Hassan was detained. If it was a Guoan, he would have done that. Wu Ming nodded thoughtfully. By the way, won't this place be discovered by the people of the Holy City? I remember that they have been searching for the village of the mountain people. Tang Sanzang asked. In this regard, Wu Ming shook his head. The location of this village is very hidden, and it's basically impossible to find. However, just after Wu Ming finished speaking, there was an explosion. Boom. Chapter 763. Boom. The sound of the explosion came from outside the house. In an instant, Wu Ming activated his mental power to the maximum, wanting to see what happened. Then Ito ran in too hastily and said with a serious face. Something happened, someone attacked the village. However, at this moment Wu Ming also saw it. Located at the entrance of the village, there was black smoke at the moment, which was the residue of the explosion. Although the black smoke was dense, Wu Ming's mental power was not a pair of glasses, so he could see the enemy in the black smoke. There was only one enemy. Fully armed with red and white armor, and on the tight helmet, the sharp horns like the devil looked particularly ferocious. Red magic lightning emitted from the knight's great sword in the enemy's hand, and it turned out that the explosion at the entrance of the village was caused by this person. Mordred. Wu Ming said the name of the intruder. Mordred? Hearing Wu Ming's words, Quiet Hassan was shocked. That lunatic? How did that guy come here? Tang Sanzang also had a dignified expression. It seemed that she seemed to have met Mordred in the Holy City, and the relationship between the two was not very good. However, the truth was simple. This place has been discovered. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he opened the portal and walked in. Destination, where Mordred was, the entrance of Higashi village. When Wu Ming completely entered the portal closed instantly. In the end, only Wu Ming's voice remained in the air. The three of you, hurry up and cover the villagers to take refuge, please. To be honest, just as he said that the people of the Holy City would not find this place, the other party launched an attack. Although there was only one person, Wu Ming did not feel lucky. As one of the Knights of the Round Table, Wu Ming naturally knew Mordred. Mordred's fighting style was relatively wild, or rather she fought like a berserker. It was impossible to tell that she was a Knight of Camelot. You could say that she did not use her brain or that she was simple. Often such people were the easiest to deal with. But at the same time they were also the most difficult to deal with. For example, after becoming a servant, she would not hesitate to use her noble phantoms. Claret Blood Arthur. Boom. The earth was wailing, and the red lightning on the ground indicated that Mordred had once again used a noble artifact. Ah! What happened? What happened? Was there no one who could fight? I came here alone on purpose. I'm so disappointed. Mordred waved the king's sword, dispersing the red lightning on the blade and dispersing the smoke and dust from the explosion. To be honest, she was afraid that she would blow up the entire village. Therefore, she released her noble phantasm with the least damage. She wanted to lure the servant out and punish him. After all, she was the Lion King's knight. As a knight, how could she blast away both the enemy and the existence? Of course, it was to kill the enemy and then blow up the village. Thinking of this, Mordred's face under the helmet revealed a sinister smile. However, what caught Mordred's eyes were only the villagers who woke up from their slumber, frantically fleeing, and a few burning houses. This is really disappointing. Then let this blow end all of you. Mordred said and once again raised the king's sword in front of her. Claret Blood Arthur. Magic gushed out from the king's sword, reaching the dark sky. Mordred didn't hold back anymore. It seemed like she was really going to destroy the village with her next attack, just as she had said she would. It's over, Mordred. A voice came from the village. Mordred paused when she heard the voice. She raised the king's sword that was emitting red lightning. Then Mordred laughed impudently. Villothoranciate. You are really here. Take this. After Mordred finished speaking, she squeezed her magic and increased the output of her noble phantasm. If Mordred's light pillar was as thick as a wash basin, then she was now raising a light pillar that was as thick as the pillars of a huge palace. As for Mordred, because of the overload, there was a crack in her armor. Since Mordred was so generous, Wu Ming naturally used his noble phantasm to fight back. Silver Meteor, Meteor Silver Splendor. A silver-white pillar rose from the ground in the direction of the village, standing opposite the red pillar that appeared outside the village. Then the two pillars collided together. Then, like a DNA spiral, the red and white pillars intertwined and spiraled into the sky. The DNA pillar that rushed into the clouds seemed to have some kind of chemical reaction, causing the clouds to change color. There were also traces of red and white lightning. Wu Ming and Mordred continued the output of the light cannon. Finally, as if unable to withstand the chemical reaction, the clouds rounded into a sphere and exploded directly. Because of the height, the ground was not affected by the explosion. However, the strong light from the explosion made the entire East Village as bright as day. However, this sun only lasted for a moment. In just a few seconds, the sun disappeared, and the day turned back to night. Although it was night time, the surrounding scene was still vaguely visible. Because the explosion of the clouds had completely dispersed the dark clouds above and around East Village, allowing the moonlight to shine on the ground. If the houses that were still burning and the panicked people were removed, the moonlight shining on East Village would definitely be a beautiful scene. If Da Vinci was here, he would definitely be very impressed. Although there was no Da Vinci, others would also be impressed. So powerful. Silent Hassan, who had already walked out of the house, saw the scene just now. She was stunned by the effect of Wu Ming and Mordred's attack. Whether it was Mordred or Wu Ming, they were on a completely different level from her, the assassin. That's true. Itafuda nodded stiffly as he walked out of the house. If he had been able to unleash such a powerful light cannon, he wouldn't have had such a hard time dealing with the Terra no Masakado. What undying devil man. Under the judgment of the holy light cannon, not even dregs would be left. Tang Sanzang, on the other hand, nodded with satisfaction. As expected of my second disciple. This is much stronger than Beiji. Silent Hassan and Kotohira looked at Tang Sanzang helplessly, as if they were powerless to complain. Let's hurry up and guide the villagers. After Silent Hassan finished speaking, she left in a flash and returned to Tang Sanzang and Kotohira. But I'm so hungry. Tang Sanzang looked like he could not take it anymore. All right. I'll make you rice later. Let's go. On the other side, a black-haired man wearing a simple leather jacket and holding a bow and arrow was guiding the villagers away. As expected of the Knights of the Round Table. They're really powerful. The archer who had also seen the previous scene praised. However, it was only a praise. After all, the villagers were the most important. Chapter 764. With the entrance of the village as the dividing line, Mordred was on the outside while Wu Ming was on the inside. Both of them had temporarily put away their weapons. When the clouds exploded from their attacks, Wu Ming and Mordred's attacks were interrupted. Wu Ming's figure was also reflected in Mordred's eyes because of the disappearance of the clouds. However, Mordred had no time to pay attention to Wu Ming. His armor was cracked and he was panting heavily. He was using his sword to support his body, looking extremely tired. Wu Ming, who was in the village, was also not feeling well, but it was not as bad as Mordred's. Because he had used up too much mana in an instant, Wu Ming was only panting twice. Because his mana had been supplied to the tens of thousands of skywings, and because the spiritual base's mana was not as good as his main body's, Wu Ming did not have much mana left. Therefore, using so much mana in an instant was still a bit of a burden for Wu Ming. However, for Mordred to be able to contend with Wu Ming, it was truly abnormal. Could it be that Mordred also has the Lion King's blessing? Wu Ming could only think of this possibility. This was also the most likely. Wu Ming had learned from Tristan that both he and Gawain had received the Lion King's blessing. In that case, it was not impossible for Mordred to also receive the Lion King's blessing. While Wu Ming was thinking, Mordred quickly adjusted his breathing, stood up straight and pulled out the king's sword from the ground. He also took off his helmet. Pretty good, Villo. Let's go again. Mordred had a maniacal smile on his face, looking like a dying flash. Are you sure you can still do it? Wu Ming came back to his senses and looked at Mordred worriedly. Wu Ming believed that Mordred had no more strength left. His armor was cracked and there were some bloodstains on his face. His spirit base was rather unstable. That's for sure. The Lion King bestowed me with a berserk blessing. I can continuously squeeze my spiritual base to release noble artifacts so you don't have to worry at all. Mordred revealed a smile. However, this smile made Wu Ming feel rather sad. Wouldn't that be using Mordred to its fullest potential? Mordred's spiritual base was squeezed to the very last bit, until it could no longer be maintained. The energy that was squeezed out would be used on the enemies of the holy city. Although it was harming others without benefiting herself, Mordred seemed to be quite happy about it. You don't need to meddle in other people's business. Villo, you have already become the Lion King's enemy. You don't have the qualifications to meddle in the Lion King's business. Just die for me." Mordred laughed arrogantly. He raised his king's sword and prepared to use another noble artifact. "Hey Mordred, you also have memories of the Holy Grail War when you were in Romania, right? Since it's also, that means you also have memories of that." Mordred nodded. "I remember that our relationship had eased a lot at that time. Do you really have to make things like this?" Wu Ming was not willing to fight with the Knights of the Round Table from the beginning. Whether it was Tristan, Gawain, or Mordred, he was not willing to fight. Due to special circumstances, Gawain and Lancelot did not have any hostility towards Wu Ming when they met. Tristan did not listen to advice, so Wu Ming directly took him down. In the end, Wu Ming made a deal with Tristan and did not kill him. Gawain hated Wu Ming the most, but Wu Ming only destroyed Gawain's armor and weapon. Gawain fainted mostly because he was angry. The last one was Mordred in front of him. Because Mordred used a noble artifact, Wu Ming had no choice but to use a noble artifact to counteract it. However, in general, Wu Ming did not want to fight with the Knights of the Round Table. "What nonsense are you talking about here? Yesterday's friend, today's enemy. Isn't this normal? As long as it's the Lion King's order, I, Mordred, will not hesitate to obey. As long as it's the Lion King's enemy, I, Mordred, will not hesitate to attack. You can only blame yourself for standing on the wrong side, Villo." After saying that, Mordred raised the king's sword up high, and scarlet lightning emerged from the king's sword again. However, Wu Ming, who was opposite Mordred, had a regretful expression. "It's really sad. You have to know that you also have a trace of my bloodline. To put it simply, you are also my—" "Shut up." However, before Wu Ming could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by Mordred's thunderous voice. "My father is only the Lion King. Remember this." Mordred's eyes widened as if something forbidden had been touched. The blessing that the Lion King gave her was activated again. Her spiritual base was converted into magic power, and finally, her magic power was converted into a noble artifact. Boom! Mordred raised the king's sword up high and exploded with an unprecedented beam of light. The beam of light that Mordred raised had a diameter that was comparable to the diameter of the entire village. In the village, shouted Ta, who was guiding the villagers to take shelter, widened his eyes. Hey, it can't be, right? This attack will definitely make us disappear." What should we do?" shouted Ta. "Quickly think of a way." Tang Sanzang grabbed shouted Ta's neck and shook him. "I can't do anything. I can only ask the Villo who has already rushed over." Shouted Ta shook his head helplessly. "Lord Villo?" Quiet Hassan looked at the direction of the village entrance worriedly and murmured. The scene changed to the entrance of the village. Wu Ming sighed. Wu Ming frowned and looked at Mordred. "With the power of this demon and your current spiritual base, you will disappear after this attack. There was no other way." Even through analysis, just by looking at it with the naked eye, he could see that Mordred would definitely disappear. The completely shattered armor revealed Mordred's calm expression. Her delicate skin had begun to crack. Blood flowed out from the cracked wound, and the wound was rapidly expanding. The blood that flowed out had begun to turn into magic power and dissipate. This was the precursor of the followers' exit. "It doesn't matter at all. As long as I can get rid of you, traitor. The queen will be very happy." At this moment, Mordred, whose face was covered in blood, showed a naive smile. It was very strange. The traitor knight wants to help the queen, but he wants to eliminate me, the queen's close servant. There is nothing more ironic than this. Mordred was angry and wanted to say something, but Wu Ming immediately interrupted her. "But you don't have a chance, Mordred." Chapter 765. Mordred's eyes narrowed. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Mordred already felt that something was wrong. Thus, Mordred hurriedly swung down her attack. However, just like what Wu Ming said, Mordred did not have a chance. Something was faster than her. The silver-white chains that were emitting a purple aura wrapped around Mordred's body. Her arms, thighs, abdomen, neck, and finally the emperor sword that Mordred was holding high was wrapped up by the chains. At this moment, the sound of the chains entered Mordred's ears. Clang, clang, clang. The continuous sound of the chains came from behind Mordred. Mordred tilted her head slightly and saw a dark purple ripple. The chains were coming out from there. Although Mordred did not see where the ripple came from, needless to say, it was on Wu Ming's side. Damn it, How dare you trick me? Mordred struggled, trying to break free from the chains, but it was not effective. However, the enraged Mordred once again overdrew his spiritual base. In an instant, the strength of his muscles was raised to the extreme. In the form of monstrous strength, Mordred broke free from the shackles of the chains and waved the Emperor's sword in his hand. However, it did not have any effect. Silver, meteor silver. Along with the release of a simple noble phantasm, a silver-white pillar of light collided with Mordred's attack. The atmosphere shook, and the airflow was like a storm that swept across the sky. However, in the end, Wu Ming's noble phantasm cancelled out Mordred's noble phantasm. Mordred, who had been bound by Wu Ming's annihilation lock for a while, no matter if it was her magic or the power of her noble phantasm, they were all destroyed by the annihilation lock. Even if Mordred overdrew her spiritual base again, her noble phantasm was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Therefore, Wu Ming's casual attack was able to cancel out Mordred's noble phantasm. Wu Ming shook his head silently, then looked at Mordred's direction. However, there was nothing in Mordred's position other than Wu Ming's annihilation lock. As soon as Mordred swung the Emperor's sword, due to the excessive collapse of her spirit base, she was forced to leave the stage. That's why it's best to talk less and do more. No matter if you're a villain or a real villain, you'll always fall because you talk too much. In fact, if Mordred hadn't been so crazy, she wouldn't have been forced out of the arena due to the excessive collapse of her spirit base. After all, the blessing given by the Lion King's Holy Grail was to go berserk and not die suddenly. Simply put, Mordred can still be saved. However, Mordred had chosen to self-destruct, and in the end she did not succeed. Compared to a certain Stella, it was too embarrassing. However, leaving this place early isn't necessarily a bad thing. Goodbye, Mordred. Wu Ming seemed to be saying goodbye to Mordred. Is it over? A voice entered Wu Ming's ears. Wu Ming unhurriedly put away the annihilation lock and looked at the figure. Due to his mental strength, Wu Ming noticed the figure's arrival when it was still a distance away, so he was not surprised. It was the bow-wielding man who was busy evacuating the villagers. You must be Arash Kamango, the great hero of Persia. Wu Ming showed kindness to the archer. I'm not a great hero. I'm just an archer who hopes to stop the war. Arash smiled and said humbly. However, this also meant that he acknowledged his identity. I've heard about you from Cursed Wrist and Chaldea's master. Thank you for your hard work, Mr. Villo. After Wu Ming left, Cursed Wrist and Gadatsi must have told Arash about Wu Ming. The thank you that Arash mentioned was naturally referring to Mordred's sudden attack. After all, if Wu Ming was not there, who knew what would have happened today? That was why Arash thanked Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming shook his head. It's not that hard. After all, he is my comrade. I should be the one apologizing. After Wu Ming said that, he did not say anything else. The same went for Arash. The two of them looked at each other for a while and then smiled at each other. Haha, let's skip the pleasantries. It's a little too formal. Indeed, as a friend, it would be too formal to continue the pleasantries. Wu Ming had a good impression of Arash, the great hero. It was mainly because Arash's personality was neither servile nor overbearing. His tone was gentle and he was quite polite. In short, Wu Ming liked to make friends with Arash. Villo there answered, King Arthur's subordinate, first knight of the Round Table. Arash Kamango, King Manuchi Hale's warrior. Then Wu Ming extended a hand. Modern handshake etiquette, I quite like it. Arash did not say anything. He smiled and shook Wu Ming's hand. Then the two of them spoke at the same time. Nice to meet you. The moon gradually moved to the westernmost side, and the sun slowly rose from the easternmost side. The sun shone on the earth. Although the village was in a mess because of the aftermath of the battle, fortunately, there were no casualties. Even Mordred's initial attack had only destroyed a few houses that were used as warehouses and no one lived in them. Wu Ming, Arash, Quiet Hassan, Idu Tengta, and Tang Sanzang worked together with the villagers to clean up the village. I really didn't expect that a knight of the Round Table would leave here. Idu Tengta was holding some wooden planks and was slightly surprised. My second apprentice is here, that guy will naturally leave. Tang Sanzang said proudly as if she was the one who killed Mordred. Although he wanted to complain about Tang Sanzang's speech, Idu Tengta, who had seen Tang Sanzang's mouth cannon, said that it was better to avoid it, so he immediately changed the topic. By the way, Arash, who is by His Excellency Villo's side, doesn't seem to be ordinary. Idu Tengta looked at Arash, who was on the other side, sorting out the items with Wu Ming. Arash is also a local servant in this area. He is a legendary figure who can tear the earth apart. In any case, Tang Sanzang had also wandered around this singularity, so he had a lot of knowledge about the local stories. Therefore he was no stranger to the great hero Arash. By the way, where did Quiet Donor go? Tang Sanzang thought of Quiet Hassan, and he couldn't find her at all. However, Ida Tingta shook his head naturally, and he didn't know where she went. In a corner, Quiet Hassan was looking at Wu Ming's figure. Because of the mask, Quiet Hassan's expression couldn't be seen, but from time to time, some words full of nostalgia could be heard from Quiet Hassan's mouth. Servillo? Chapter 766. In the north, near the mountains of East Village, a black shadow was jumping up and down between the mountains, moving toward East Village at a very fast speed. Not far behind this black shadow, several figures were also moving quickly, but they weren't as fast as the black shadow in front of them. Whether it was the black shadow in front or the few figures behind, they were all familiar to Wu Ming. These people were naturally Gadatsi and her party heading to the Yazril temple. Is Mr. Cursed Wrist in such a hurry? Mashu looked at the figure in front of her that was almost out of her sight, and said to herself in confusion. After all, it's Cursed Wrist's village. It's normal to be anxious, Hassan and Matthew explained as they ran side by side. Because the Yazril temple was located on a mountain higher than East Village, the scene of DNA helix exploding over East Village last night was naturally reflected in the eyes of Gadatsi and her party. If such a thing had happened in Hassan's village, she would have been very anxious. Don't worry, if nothing goes wrong, Assassin should have returned long ago. With him around, the village will never have any problems. Gadatsi, who was in Matthew's arms, was full of trust in Wu Ming. Hassan looked at Gadatsi deeply, then nodded. But the way Hassan looked at Gadatsi made Gadatsi feel a little awkward. And the reason for the awkwardness was, by the way, Matthew, why don't you put me down? This position is too embarrassing. Gadatsi whispered in Matthew's ear. When they went there, Gadatsi was riding the car, invented by Da Vinci. However, in the Yazril temple, Da Vinci's car had some problems, so Da Vinci stayed to repair her car. Therefore, on the way back, Gadatsi was carried by Matthew. After all, the road was rugged and Gadatsi could not move alone. It was the best choice to be carried by Matthew, Gadatsi's servant. Anyway, it was unlikely that Hassan and Cursed Wrist Hassan would carry Gadatsi. Even if they were willing, Matthew would not be willing to give the opportunity to carry his senior to others. But if Gadatsi insisted, Matthew would still consider it. But, Master, the mountain here is too rugged. Without the help of a servant, ordinary people can hardly move. Matthew denied Gadatsi. Gadatsi also looked around subconsciously. They were now running on the stone wall. If they slipped, they would fall directly. A servant would be fine, but if it was Gadatsi in her human form, she might be done for. Therefore, in Matthew's view, it was too dangerous to let his senior walk alone. It's okay. Da Vinci is still behind. I'll just take her car. Indeed, there was no sign of Da Vinci around Gadatsi and the others. Find a place to put me down, Matthew. Da Vinci knows this way. She is a genius. I'll wait here for her to pick me up. The implication was that Gadatsi wanted Matthew and Hassan to go first. No, I'll stay with Master. Matthew said firmly while stopping at a relatively flat place. She, Mashu, could do anything, but she couldn't leave her senior and Master alone in this deep mountain. This was a matter of principle. When Hassan saw Mashu stop, he shook his head helplessly. Then I'll go first. Hassan said, accelerated, and chased in the direction of Cursed Wrist Hassan. Taking a closer look, Hassan's speed in this group of mountains was almost the same as Cursed Wrist Hassan's speed in this place. In other words, Hassan had actually been taking care of Matthew and Gadatsi. Matthew and Gadatsi looked at each other and smiled awkwardly. But since things had come to this point, they could just wait. Anyway, they could chat to pass the time. She had to admit that Da Vinci was indeed a genius. Her car was quickly repaired. Hey, your genius Da Vinci is here. Da Vinci was driving a strange, small aircraft similar to a UFO, flying toward Gadatsi and Matthew. Lubdavir, who was responsible for protecting Da Vinci, was half squatting on this small UFO. As a knight of the Round Table, he naturally had the unique skill of not falling off from the object he was riding. Da Vinci's speed was very fast. Matthew and Gadatsi only waited for a little while before Da Vinci came over in her UFO. Finally, Da Vinci is here. Gadatsi stood up excitedly. Did you miss me, the genius? To Chika-kun, Da Vinci opened the UFO hatch and motioned for Gadatsi to come in. Gadazzi nodded, walked in quickly and sat down in the co-pilot seat next to Da Vinci. Lubdavir jumped down from the UFO. Miss Matthew and I will walk. After all, the UFO's design structure could only accommodate 2 people, the driver's seat and the co-pilot's seat. Therefore, the surface of this UFO could only accommodate 1 person. I agree with Mr. Lubdavir's opinion. Master, you and Da Vinci can go first. Mr. Lubdavir and I will catch up, Matthew said to Gadazzi in the co-pilot's seat. However, this was the best choice, so Gadazzi also nodded. Then Da Vinci, let's go. The nozzle behind the UFO suddenly sprayed flames, and the entire UFO flew out directly. Wait a minute, Da Vinci, I haven't fastened my seat belt yet. Looking at the UFO in the distance, Matthew and Lubdavir didn't know what to say. Then Lubdavir looked at Matthew, his compatriot. Let's go, Matthew. Yes, Mr. Lubdavir. The 2 also embarked on the journey to Dongji village. At the forefront, Cursed Wrist Hassan arrived at Dongji village first. Standing on a cliff, he looked down at the messy but not damaged Dongji village, as well as the villagers who were packing up and the servants who helped the villagers pack up. Seeing this, Cursed Wrist Hassan breathed a sigh of relief. At least the village was still there and the villagers seemed to be fine. Immediately afterward, Cursed Wrist Hassan jumped down. In Dongji village, Wuming, who had been separated from the other servants and was helping the villagers pack up alone, looked in a certain direction thoughtfully. Immediately afterward, Cursed Wrist Hassan appeared in the direction where Wuming was looking. Sure enough, you're back, Mr. Cursed Wrist Hassan. Chapter 767. When Cursed Wrist Hassan heard the word as expected, it sounded rather impressive. As expected of His Excellency Villo. Although I didn't use the aura concealment technique, His Excellency Villo was able to discover me in advance from such a distance. Cursed Wrist Hassan complimented Wuming. You're too kind. His Excellency Cursed Wrist also said that you didn't use the aura concealment technique. It's normal for me to discover you, Wuming responded to Cursed Wrist Hassan. After complimenting each other, it was time to get down to business. Since you came back alive, that means you've succeeded, right? As if responding to Wuming's words, Cursed Wrist Hassan tapped twice on his skull-masked face. Yes, thanks to His Excellency Villo, Sir First Hassan didn't do anything to me. Cursed Wrist Hassan's tone was quite grateful. Then, Cursed Wrist Hassan stretched out a hand with something in his hand. Taking a closer look, wasn't the thing in Cursed Wrist Hassan's hand the small box that Wuming gave him? I'll return it to you, His Excellency Villo. Cursed Wrist Hassan handed the small box to Wuming. However, Wuming just smiled. Keep it. Maybe it'll be useful in the future. Cursed Wrist Hassan was taken aback, then nodded. If that's the case, I'll accept it. Cursed Wrist Hassan was not a pretentious person. Since the other party said he would accept it, then he would accept it. By the way, where are Tachika and the others? Are they still behind? However, after Wuming finished speaking, the roar of the aircraft entered his ears. Then Wuming searched for UFO, and saw it. Wuming was shocked. What the hell is this? Hey Villo, did you miss me, the genius? Da Vinci opened the hatch, quickly walked out and greeted Wuming. Gadazzi, on the other hand, seemed to be carsick. She was already lying on the platform in front of the passenger seat, twitching non-stop. How did you make it? Wuming asked. This is a flying machine made from the ores I found on the road. Although it can only accommodate 2 people, it is a genuine flying machine. Da Vinci proudly introduced his masterpiece to Wuming. The corner of Wuming's mouth twitched. Building a car out of pure wood and a flying machine out of ore. As expected of Da Vinci. You might as well change your name to Thomas Alva Da Vinci. At this moment, a black shadow appeared in the surroundings. Seriously, isn't it too perverted to sit on this thing? The person who came was none other than Hassan. At this moment, Hassan had taken off his mask, and the angry expression on his face was clearly visible. Originally, Baihui Hassan was about to reach Dongji village when a strange big bird suddenly jumped out from behind and almost hit Baihui Hassan. Not only that, this big bird also robbed Hassan of his second person to reach the village record. It was really abominable. What's more, there were 2 people in this big bird. Doesn't that mean that I'm actually the 4th? Furthermore, the one sitting inside was that smiling Da Vinci. That smile was too similar to that of the angel who bullied her. It was really infuriating. At this time, Matthew's voice also came. Senior. Matthew quickly ran into the cockpit and carried out Gadazzi, who was carsick. Putting the unconscious Gadazzi on his lap, Matthew looked at Da Vinci. Da Vinci, what's going on? Da Vinci smiled embarrassedly. Oh, didn't my Da Vinci number 2 get repaired? Updated? The speed increased a bit too fast. Don't worry, I set up a safety device. Tachika-san just fainted. However, Matthew couldn't say anything. He could only hold back his resentment and take care of Gadazzi. Servillo. At this time, Bedivere also arrived. Lucius, thank you for your hard work. Wuming greeted Bedivere. However, Bedivere shook his head. Just call me Bedivere, Servillo. I have already told Chaldea my identity. Wuming suddenly realized and then nodded. It seemed that something had happened that made Bedivere open his heart. Tiske, I already felt that you were a knight of the Round Table. Hassan looked unhappy. It seemed that she still had a lot of resentment against the Knights of the Round Table. But seeing that she didn't do anything, it seemed that Hassan also understood that resentment shouldn't be vented on allies. Senior Villo, you and Mr. Bedivere really hid it from us. Matthew said with a little temper. Sorry, but even so, I still think it's better for Bedivere's identity to be explained by him. Wuming apologized with a smile. And Matthew was just joking, so she agreed with Wuming's words. On Chaldea's side, monitoring Gadazzi's body, Roman couldn't help but complain after hearing it. I thought it was strange at the beginning. Why would Lucius be friends with the Villo? It turns out that it's the relationship between Bedivere and the Villo. Hearing Roman's voice, Wuming frowned and asked, I suddenly feel that your complaints are so weak. In Chaldea, the doctor's back was gray. By the way, doctor, when will Senior wake up? Matthew asked with concern. Gadazzi waking up as soon as possible is the most important thing for her at the moment. It should be fine in a few minutes. Roman looked at Gadazzi's physical data and replied to Matthew. Matthew breathed a sigh of relief. A few minutes is not a big deal. In this regard, Wuming spoke. In that case, let's go to the house and wait for a while. Just in time we can start the battle plan again. The servants looked at each other and nodded. Soon, everyone came to Gadazzi's residence, which was referred to as Chaldean Embassy. By the way, Wuming brought Quiet Hassan, who was rescued, and Tang Sanzang and Kurodo Ta, who were brought back by the way. Just then Gadazzi woke up. Matthew, I seem to see my deceased grandmother waving to me. Mashu was so scared that she didn't know what to do. What? Senior, you have to cheer up, Senior. Wu Ming laughed involuntarily. Well, Tachika, they're new partners here. Don't bully Matthew like this. After Gadazzi woke up, Wu Ming introduced Tang Sanzang and others to Cursed Wrist and others, and then began the battle meeting. First of all, report your situation in Azrael Temple, Tachika. Chapter 768. Yes. Gadazzi stood up and saluted. After explaining the details, Gadazzi summed it up in one sentence. After successfully arriving at the Azrael Temple, we passed the trial of the first Hassan. After showing the token you gave to the first Hassan, Cursed Wrist Hassan was fine, and the first Hassan said that he would help Chaldea save humanity. That's all. Very well, since the assassin agreed, then he will definitely help us at the right time. We don't have to pay attention to this for the time being. Wuming nodded with satisfaction. Sure enough, after the first Hassan saw that he was here, he made a big promise. Helping to save humanity was not just helping to save the humanity of this singularity. If the last singularity, which was the Mesopotamia singularity, had the help of the first Hassan, it would be a great help. By the way, Villo Senior, what happened in the village last night? Matthew raised his hand and asked. Mordred found this place and launched an attack. In the end, because of excessive overdraft of the spiritual base, she left. The village was slightly damaged and no villagers died. Wuming reported quite concisely. Mordred. Gadazzi thought of the Mordred in the London singularity. Don't be sad, the servant is just a clone of the heroic spirit. The Mordred in this singularity is not necessarily the Mordred you met. Because she is the Mordred I met. Wuming added in his heart. She betrayed the king when she was alive, but she can't see the traitor this time. It's really ironic. Wuming shook his head silently. However, Mordred has left after all, which saves you from not being able to kill her. Sorry? Matthew and Gadazzi said in unison. Wuming waved his hand indifferently and continued to speak. Then let's move on to the main topic. Wuming became serious. After looking around at everyone, Wuming opened his mouth. Everyone, I plan to attack the holy city tomorrow morning. Everyone exclaimed in unison. Isn't this a little too early? Hassan asked tentatively. Indeed, and I think it's a little rushed. Cursed wrist. Hassan nodded. Actually, it's not fast at all. Wu Ming shook his head and continued. When I was rescuing Serenity Hassan, I met a Guawan. Hearing this, everyone's heart froze. I'm afraid he's already guessed that I've teamed up with the mountain people and will be on guard against us. That's why I'm suggesting an immediate attack tomorrow. I see. The best defense is offense. Cursed wrist. Hassan nodded thoughtfully. That was what Wu Ming meant. If they attack tomorrow, the other party might not expect Wu Ming and the others to attack so quickly. That would catch the other party off guard. Of course, in addition to that, there was another reason. The village has been discovered by Mordred. Who knows if she has already asked the Knight of Solemnity to send a message to the Holy City. However, with Mordred's temperament, it was unlikely that she would make such a delicate decision. The possibility of Mordred not having any Knight of Solemnity following her was too small. In addition, Lancelot also told Wu Ming that Mordred had a small number of Knights of Solemnity. Therefore, if Mordred's Knights of Solemnity did not show up, it was more or less possible that they had returned to the Holy City. Or rather, it was more reasonable for her to order the Knights of Solemnity to "Don't follow me. I want to start ravaging alone." After that, all the Knights of Solemnity returned to the Holy City. After all, that was Mordred, wasn't it? Assassin, do you mean that the Holy City might strike first and send the Knights of Solemnity to attack us? Gadotsi asked thoughtfully. Wu Ming nodded and added. That's not the worst. The worst should be the Lion King's Holy Lance. Arash suddenly said at this time. Am I right, Your Excellency Villo? Wu Ming nodded. The Lion King's Holy Lance is tied to the mist anchors on both sides of the planet. Even if it's ordinary power, it's not something an ordinary servant can handle. If it's the true name Liberation, it won't be a problem to launch an attack from the Holy City. Wu Ming said something rather terrifying. If the Lion King knows our location. Matthew said lightly. Then aren't we in danger now? Gadotsi continued Matthew's words, looking shocked. So, everyone is busy packing up and moving now. Arash pointed outside the window. Not only that, because some of the buildings in the village were destroyed and because of the aftermath of me and Mordred, many houses are already in danger. The combination of the former and the latter, leaving is the best way. Well, but where can we go? Cursed wrist. Hassan thought. Let's go to the West Village, Wu Ming said. My village? 100 Faces. Hassan was shocked. But, Your Excellency Villo, the West Village is indeed not far from the East Village, but that's only for us. It's impractical for the villagers to move there en masse. Cursed wrist. Hassan was not trying to undermine Wu Ming's plan. If it was a few villagers moving, it would be fine, but this time the villagers were moving en masse, and the difficulty had increased by many times. However, Wu Ming did not find it difficult. Don't worry. My ability, the portal, allows me to connect two places I have been or seen at will. There is no time limit and I can set the size of the portal myself. So, it's not difficult for the villagers to move en masse. Yeah, I forgot that Assassin has this ability. Gadotsi clenched her left fist and hit her palm. After moving the villagers of the East Village, we can start preparing in advance. After everyone sleeps for a night, I'll use the portal to teleport everyone over the next morning. If a Guawan was here, he would definitely scold Wu Ming for cheating, because Wu Ming had entered the Holy City and walked around once. Of course, if the Lion King's Holy Lance was still maintaining the light film, Wu Ming's portal might not be able to pass through. So, it would depend on the situation when the time came. Question: why don't we attack at night? Quiet Hassan, who had not spoken much, spoke up. Wu Ming did not even need to answer this question. Gadotsi and the others were very clear about this question. It's all because of Gawain, Gadotsi and Matthew replied in unison. Chapter 769. As people who had witnessed Gawain's power, Matthew and Gadotsi still remembered it clearly even now. The Knights of the Round Table were all given different blessings by the Lion King with the Holy Grail, and Gawain's blessing is everlasting. As the name implies, as long as he is around, it will always be daytime, Wu Ming explained. Therefore, even if Gadotsi and the others chose to attack at night, once they arrived at the Holy City and encountered Gawain, it would become daytime because of Gawain. As the gatekeeper of the Holy City, Gawain basically would not leave the gate of the Holy City. Therefore, the probability of them encountering Gawain was 100%. Therefore, Wu Ming said that it was better to wait until the day to attack. Then there's no other way. Hassan expressed that he understood. After the villagers are relocated and settled, we'll use one night to recharge and prepare for the attack at dawn the next day. Everyone nodded and then began to move the villagers. First, they gathered the villagers who had already packed their things to a slightly open area in the village. Then Wu Ming walked to the center, waved his hand and opened a black-purple ripple. However, this ripple was only the size of a person. Immediately afterward, Wu Ming looked at Baijiu Hassan. Bai Qian, come with me first. After all, that was Hassan's home ground. It was not a bad idea to let Hassan return to the West Village to make arrangements. Hassan nodded. She was not stupid. On the contrary, she was very smart, so she naturally understood what Wu Ming meant. She walked to the portal, adjusted her mentality and walked in first. Immediately after, Wu Ming looked at Cursed Wrist Hassan and the others behind him. I'll expand the area of the portal later. At that time you can start to arrange for the villagers to go in. Cursed Wrist Hassan and the others all nodded. Then Wu Ming pounced forward and entered the portal, his figure completely disappearing. In the blink of an eye, Wu Ming came to the West Village that he was familiar with. I'll inform the villagers and let them get ready. After Hassan finished speaking, he left Wu Ming's side as if he was escaping. It seemed that Hassan was quite unwilling to be alone with Wu Ming. After shrugging his shoulders, Wu Ming also left the portal. He was ready to head to Abante. Because Abante was hovering vertically over the West Village, it was not difficult to find. Wu Ming came to the monitoring room in Abante and sat down. Speaking of which, this chair is really comfortable. Wu Ming patted the sofa chair he was sitting on with a comfortable expression. Translator. WQL editor. Alim, as if it wanted to make Wu Ming more comfortable, two wooden tentacles stretched out of the floor and started to massage Wu Ming's shoulders like two hands. Wu Ming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Alright, Abant, I appreciate your kindness. Speaking of which, where's Gilio? The moment Wu Ming finished speaking, a virtual screen appeared in front of Wu Ming. The picture on the screen was Gilio. At this moment, Gilio was playing in the nearby mountains. It couldn't be helped. Gilio was unlikely to be with the monkey, and other than the village there was no one else here. So Gilio could only entertain herself. This guy. Wu Ming looked at Gilio, who was playing with a soul-eating beast that Wu Ming had seen once. Wu Ming showed a helpless expression. Gilio, can't you see that demonic beast is about to cry, gate? As Wu Ming chanted the spell, a black-purple ripple appeared beside Wu Ming. At the same time on the screen, a black-purple ripple appeared below Gilio, who was playing with the demonic beast. Gilio naturally fell into the black-purple ripple and let out a rather cute sound. Ugh. Gilio appeared from the teleportation door beside Wu Ming and sat on the ground. Master, are you back? Just as Gapril finished speaking, another black shadow fell out of the portal that had yet to close. It fell straight into Gapril's arms as she sat on the ground. Oh, my little cutie, have you followed me too? Gilio smiled and stroked the soul-eating beast's eyeless seaweed head. Then the soul-eating beast opened its mouth and didn't dare to make any sound. As a demonic beast, it had its own instincts. Its instincts told it that this guy who had been playing with it wasn't someone to be trifled with. The person sitting on the chair over there was even more so. It felt like it was in the stomach of a certain creature, and the surrounding ground and walls gave it a strong sense of crisis. Then keep it and play with it. Remember not to let it run around. It won't do if it hurts someone. Wu Ming wasn't too concerned about the frightened soul-eating beast. Yes, thank you for your magnanimity, master, Gilio said to Wu Ming with a smile. Then Gilio came to her senses. By the way, master, why did you suddenly come back? Gilio turned over and sat on the soul-eating beast's back, swaying her legs. The East Village has been exposed. The villagers of the East Village will move over later. Looking at the villagers of the West Village who were gathered by Hassan on the screen, Wu Ming explained to Gilio. By the way, did anything happen while I was away? For example, did the West Village expose its location? Of course not, master. Abant's monitoring ability is very strong. It has monitored everything within a kilometer of the village. As long as it finds anything unusual, it will tell me. Wu Ming nodded. After thinking about it carefully, he realized that something was amiss. In other words, Abant has been doing things these days and you have been playing? In an instant, Gilio broke out in a cold sweat. No. How could that be, master? I also patrolled around the village, aha. Just kidding, I didn't expect you to do that. Although Wu Ming was right, this sentence still made Gilio a little sad. But it was just a little sad. She would be fine after playing with this soul-eating beast. With that thought in mind, Jillian looked at the shivering soul-devouring beast beneath her. This made the soul-eating beast, which sensed the danger, tremble even more, but it couldn't do anything. The powerful aura around it made it dare not move at all. Just when Wu Ming decided to expand the portal below, a new image suddenly appeared on the big screen. A knight with a magic bow and long red hair came to the surroundings of the West Village. Tristan? Chapter 770. Wu Ming and Tristan were both knights of the Round Table. The two of them had met not long ago, so Wu Ming definitely wouldn't recognize the wrong person. Why is Tristan here? Wu Ming muttered to himself, puzzled. Tristan was clearly imprisoned at the bottom of the pyramid by Ramses II, so why would he come here? Although there was a possibility of impersonation, Wu Ming felt that there was another possibility, and that was, Ramses II had released Tristan. It would be fine if he was an impersonator, but if he was released by Ramses II, then it would be a great disadvantage. Just like what Ramses II told Wu Ming couldn't be sure if Artoria would attack him with the Holy Lance when the singularity was about to be repaired. Similarly, Wu Ming couldn't be sure if Ramses II would stab him in the back at the end. After all, if Tristan was released at this time, it would obviously disrupt the normal progress of Wu Ming and the others. Tristan, who had received the reverse blessing, was very powerful. He was no longer sad and was no longer afraid of poison. Using the invisible vacuum blade to kill could be said to be incomparably cruel. When he was stabbed in the back by Wu Ming, it was only because Wu Ming took advantage of Tristan's unfamiliarity with the enemy's intelligence. Wu Ming relied on Tristan not knowing that Wu Ming had the teleportation gate trick, so he directly used the teleportation gate to severely injure Tristan. If Tristan were to go to the village now, perhaps no one would be his match. No, Bedivere said that his arm transformed from the holy sword had the ability to restrain and weaken the Lion King's blessing. If Bedivere was here and everyone attacked together, it shouldn't be a problem to force Tristan to retreat. However, Wu Ming wouldn't let Bedivere suffer so much. Bedivere's body was already riddled with wounds, and every time he used the power of the holy sword, it would aggravate his injuries. Let's go, Giliel. Wu Ming stood up and opened a new teleportation gate. This was a portal that led directly to the surface. It would be too slow to fly over. Yes, master. When Tristan's figure appeared on the big screen, Gopral stood up from the Soul Eater beast's back, or rather, flew up. She could tell that Tristan's sudden appearance had disrupted Wu Ming's plan. As Wu Ming's weapon, Tristan naturally had to solve the problem for his master. The master and servant walked into the teleportation gate, leaving the shivering soul-devouring beast alone in Abanti's body. Vaguely, the floorboards began to wriggle as tentacle-like wooden roots quietly approached the soul-devouring beast. Wu Ming exhorted Giliel as they arrived at the portal on the ground that was connected to East Village through the portal. Someone will come later. Remember to look here. Understood, master. Giliel turned around elegantly, scattering a few feathers. Nodding, Wu Ming waved his hand, and the portal that could only accommodate one person instantly widened. It could now accommodate more than a dozen people at a time. Then I'll leave for a while. Opening a new portal, Wu Ming walked in directly. Where did Wu Ming go? Wasn't it obvious? He went to look for the rare Tristan that appeared in the wild. On Tristan's side, he was almost at West Village as he pursued the traces of humans. But for some reason he kept walking around West Village as if he couldn't find the way to West Village. However, no one would believe that a knight of the Round Table couldn't find the way to a mountain village. Suddenly, a voice came from behind Wu Ming. Long time no see, Mr. Tristan. Tristan slowly turned around. So it's Lord Villo. I didn't expect you to be here. Tristan didn't look surprised. That's right, the one who spoke was Wu Ming, who came behind Tristan through the portal. Wu Ming wasn't surprised by Tristan's question either. He casually released his magic and shattered the vacuum trap around him. The impact of the vacuum explosion sent rocks and soil flying. Wu Ming flicked the dust on his hand and looked at the place where Tristan walked. Seems like you've set up quite a few vacuum traps, Tristan. It can't be helped, Lord Villo. I don't want to feel the pain of being stabbed in the back again. As expected, setting up a vacuum trap behind him was to prevent sneak attacks from behind. But, you've also set up traps so that the villagers can't escape. Seems like you're quite confident. As long as one looked at it with confidence, one could see that Tristan had set up a lot of vacuum traps in places where it was easier to walk. He even set up a few vacuum traps in places where it was difficult to walk or even impossible to walk through. The vacuum trap Wu Ming triggered was at the level of a normal person. In other words, as long as a normal person touched the vacuum trap, they would be instantly shredded into pieces by the vacuum trap. Because of the strength of the trap, these traps were useless against Wu Ming. However, it was a good choice to act as Tristan's detector like before. Didn't the Sun King lock you up? How did you escape? Although Wu Ming didn't sense the master-slave contract he established with Tristan, after meeting him, Wu Ming was sure that the Tristan in front of him was the real Tristan. Or is it the Sun King who let you go? Whether it was the Sun King or the Lion King, it wasn't difficult for them to come into contact with the contract in Tristan's body. However, Tristan seemed to have learned his lesson after being questioned by Wu Ming. He just smiled and didn't say anything. Who knows, Lord Villo? He also gave Wu Ming a shrug. Wu Ming couldn't help but frown. Judging from Tristan's reaction, it should be the latter. In that case, I'm afraid you won't answer questions like, have you ever returned to the Holy City? Or, have you ever sent any news back from this village? However, only Tristan responded to Wu Ming with a smile and the vacuum blade from Tristan's weapon. Bang! The vacuum blade clashed with Wu Ming's sword and let out an unprecedented ear-piercing sound. It seemed that Tristan came prepared this time. What a pity, Tristan. Wu Ming shook his head slowly and pulled out the meteor silver that floated in front of him from the golden ripples. Come on, Tristan. Chapter 771. At this time, many people gathered in East Village. Gadotsi and others also encountered the enemy. In the corner of the periphery of the village, Gadotsi led a group of servants to hide. Arash, Tang Sanzang and Da Vinci stayed in the village, responsible for guiding the villagers into the portal, so only Gadotsi, Matthew, Idita, Bedivere, Cursed Wrist Hassan and Tranquil Hassan came here. Gadotsi quietly poked her head out and found nothing, so she retracted her head. After that, Gadotsi began to complain about her watch. Doctor, are you sure your detection is not wrong? It's true. I have detected a large amount of magic power approaching you, but I don't know why you can't find it. Roman, who was sitting in Chaldea's monitoring room, complained. There is another possibility, that is, the enemy has a way to hide, Cursed Wrist Hassan said in a low tone. Is it the enemy's assassin servant? Matthew said subconsciously. It may also be Castor. After all, Mr. Roman detected a large amount of magic reaction. The number of the enemy can't be small. Bedivere also said his own analysis. Sir Roman, can you detect how far away the enemy is from us? Cursed Wrist Hassan looked at Gadotsi's watch communicator. It's about 300 meters, Roman replied. 300 meters. Cursed Wrist, who had the modern knowledge given by the Holy Grail, naturally knew how much 300 meters was. So, Cursed Wrist Hassan observed the terrain. My village is built halfway up the mountain. It's extremely hidden. If the enemy is still 300 meters away from us, they shouldn't have come up yet. That might be the reason why they didn't see the enemy. So what should we do next? After all, Cursed Wrist Hassan was a local, and asking him at this time was the best solution. Gadotsi wouldn't force herself at this time. After testing the direction of the wind, Cursed Wrist Hassan came up with a plan. At this time we have to rely on Tranquility, Cursed Wrist Hassan said and looked at Tranquility Hassan. Me? I understand. Quiet Hassan was taken aback and then he understood. Tranquil Hassan actually had a very low opinion of himself, so when Cursed Wrist Hassan leaned on him, Tranquil Hassan was actually at a loss. However, after sensing the direction of the wind, she understood. However, Gadotsi, Matthew and the others who were not familiar with Quiet Hassan did not understand. Tranquil Hassan's body fluid is highly toxic. It can evaporate with the wind and the current direction of the wind is downwards. Cursed Wrist Hassan did not finish his explanation, but Gadotsi and the others understood what was going on. As long as Quiet Hassan sweated and let the sweat evaporate, and then the highly toxic sweat would be passed down with the wind, it could achieve the effect of silently killing people. Coincidentally, Tranquil Hassan has a kind of footwork that is specially used in conjunction with his poison. After Cursed Wrist Hassan finished speaking, he looked at Tranquil Hassan who had already walked forward. It's called the Silent Dance. Everyone followed Cursed Wrist Hassan's gaze and looked over. Tranquil Hassan began to dance. It was a very simple dance. As long as one remembered a few simple footwork, even an ordinary person could perform it. However, the main function of this dance was not its difficulty, but its ability to quickly make the dancer sweat. Gradually, Tranquil Hassan's body began to sweat. A cold wind blew, and the poison invisible to the naked eye was carried away by the cold wind from Tranquil Hassan's body to the bottom, which was the direction where the enemy was expected to appear. At the end of the dance, a large amount of deadly poison was evaporated into the air below by Tranquil Hassan. "It's over." Tranquil Hassan took a breath and said to Cursed Wrist Hassan and the others who were hiding behind him. Now all they needed to do was wait. "I hope Sir Arash and the others can hurry up," Cursed Wrist Hassan prayed. In East Village, Arash shouted loudly. "Everyone speed up. Faster, faster." Along with Arash, Tang Sanzang and Da Vinci were also arranging and directing the villagers to enter the portal. "I hope there are no accidents on Sir Villo's side." Arash looked at the portal worriedly and said slowly. The scene changed to Wu Ming and Tristan's side. Boom! As if the atmosphere was about to explode, the symphony bombarded Wu Ming's sword and made an explosive sound. And Wu Ming's magic power was also like free, crazily releasing magic power as sword aura. Boom crack. Tristan dodged a few magic sword auras as light as a swallow, and the sword aura hit the mountain, causing it to explode. This made Wu Ming frown in displeasure. With West Village nearby, Wu Ming could not increase the amount of magic power released. If he accidentally blew up the village, it would be terrible. And as an ADC, Tristan naturally chose to distance himself from Wu Ming. And because Tristan's attack was not as exaggerated as Wu Ming's and only used vacuum attacks, he was not afraid of blowing up the village. Rather, Tristan wished that he had the ability to blow up the village above, but unfortunately he didn't. However, this was beneficial to Tristan. Although it was inconvenient to move in the mountains, it was the same for both sides. However, Wu Ming was afraid of the slightest thing, but he could let go of it. Moreover, he was already on guard against Wu Ming's portal. Tristan dared not say that he could defeat Wu Ming, but he was sure that Wu Ming would not be able to defeat him in a short time. "It seems that you've really set me up, Tristan." Wu Ming wasn't a fool. He naturally saw that everything around him was disadvantageous to him. "You can't blame me for this, Sir Villo," Tristan replied with a smile. It was impossible to tell that he was a ruthless character who had accepted the reversal. "But aren't you mistaken?" Wu Ming said softly. Wu Ming had never been a Villo. On the contrary, the Villo had always been him, always been Wu Ming. "Then, let the second round of the game begin," Wu Ming said and suddenly flew towards Tristan. This gave Tristan a fright. Flying was a dream for ordinary people, and it was the same for knights. Because without magic it was impossible to fly. And Tristan was a knight, so naturally he had no fate with flying. I forgot that Sir Villo isn't an ordinary knight. Although there weren't many knights who could use magic, it didn't mean that they didn't exist. Wu Ming was the most mysterious member of the Knights of the Round Table. The fact that he knew magic had spread throughout the Knights of the Round Table. Wasn't the portal the best proof? Tristan scolded himself for underestimating his opponent. However, the most important thing right now was to deal with Wu Ming, who had flown in front of him. Chapter 772. In East Village, Gadotsi and the others were still waiting for the enemy's attack. "By the way, which force will the enemy be this time?" Gadotsi chatted with boredom. "We, the Mountain People, have a grudge with both the Sun King and the Lion King. It's the same over there, but I think it's the people from the Holy City. After all, Ramses II's men were all Sphinx, and it was not convenient for them to move around in this mountainous area." "Is that so, the people from the Holy City?" Gadotsi nodded, and when she thought about it, it was indeed the case. However, at this moment, a few screams and panicked voices suddenly came from below. Someone must have been poisoned. Gadotsi and the others were overjoyed. However, it was followed by more screams and panic, which meant that the enemy was really attacking. To be honest, Gadotsi would rather it was Roman's instrument that was wrong, but the fact was right in front of her. The enemy was attacking. It should be the people from the Holy City. Cursed Wrist Hassan seemed to have heard the sound of the armor and said with certainty. However, this had nothing to do with what they were going to do next. "Although I don't know how many people there are, the enemy's troops are in chaos because of the poisoning. This is a good opportunity." A light flashed in the eyes of the skull mask on Cursed Wrist Hassan's face, and it looked quite strange. Although Cursed Wrist Hassan looked quite scary at the moment, what he said was very reasonable. Take advantage of his weakness. Asterisk cough cough. Asterisk there was no need for Cursed Wrist Hassan to remind them to seize the opportunity. Gadotsi and Matthew, who had experienced 5 singularities, had already mastered a high level of combat literacy. However, just when Gadotsi was about to speak, Itatata spoke first. Let me do it. As the only archer here, I should take the responsibility of long-range sniping the enemy. Putting down his rice bag, Itatata stretched out his hand, condensed his magic, and a bow appeared in Itatata's hand. But, Your Excellency Ito Toda, I remember. Tranquil Hassan clearly remembered that Ito Toda did not like to fight. Why would he volunteer himself? I don't like fighting, but I won't back down. That would be a disgrace to my name. After saying that, Itafuta knocked an arrow on his bow and released it with a swoosh. Then a scream was heard. Ah! As expected of the ancestor of martial arts. You managed to hit the enemy with just a casual swing of your sword. Roman praised in Chaldea. Immediately afterward, Roman discovered many individual heat source reactions from the monitor on the big screen. In the end, because the distance was too far, the instrument could no longer detect them. Tachika, be careful. They have over 100 people. Looking at the dense red dots on the map, Roman gulped. To be surrounded by so many people in such a rugged mountainous area, was it a miracle or bad luck? Understood, Doctor. Matthew, get ready for battle. Gadotsi promised Roman, then looked at Matthew. Yes, sir. Matthew Gillett, get ready for battle. However, a withered arm blocked in front of Matthew. Don't worry, Ms. Matthew. Cursed wrist Hassan shook his head silently. How can we take the initiative to attack in such a place that is easy to defend and difficult to attack? Immediately afterward, Cursed wrist Hassan explained the terrain they were now in. The mountain road leading to the village was a spiral road, and Cursed wrist Hassan and the others were now in the middle of the spiral. Not only were there a lot of stones as cover, but they were also facing the road below. Due to the small population, the mountain road was quite narrow. It was impossible for a group of people to charge up. It could only accommodate a few people. If the enemy passed by here, then Cursed wrist Hassan and the others would have a headache, but they did not. Then they were in big trouble. Hearing Cursed wrist Hassan's explanation, Gadotsi and Matthew immediately thanked Roman. It's all thanks to the doctor. After all, it was Chaldea's instrument that detected the enemy who had not yet arrived. It's all thanks to Villo and Da Vinci. If it weren't for Villo's simplicity, Da Vinci wouldn't have repaired and improved the instrument's strength here. Although that was what he said, he felt that Roman was venting his grievances. Okay, doctor, help us see where the enemy is. Gadotsi comforted Roman, and did not forget to let Roman see the enemy's position. Yes, I'll see. Although it was a little perfunctory, Roman was still very happy. The detection shows that the enemy is at the corner in front where you can't see. It seemed that the enemy was not stupid. They knew that someone was ambushing them in front. It seemed that the enemy was not going to act rashly. Let me do it again, Quiet Hassan suggested. However, Cursed wrist Hassan rejected it. The enemy is already on guard. I'm afraid it won't be effective. Instead of wasting energy, it was better to wait and see. Our mission is to cover the villagers' retreat. As long as the villagers leave, we'll leave too. Therefore, all they needed to do now was to stall the enemy. Yes, just like how Tristan was going to stall Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming was not someone who could be stopped, and Tristan was not someone who could stop Wu Ming. In other words, Tristan, who was shot to the ground and rolled a few times, spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Tristan felt that he was too sad. He was beaten by Wu Ming so badly that he spat out blood again. Facing Wu Ming, who could use spirit power to fly and quickly approach him, Tristan felt that there was no way to fight this battle. In terms of defense, he was not as thick as Wu Ming. In terms of attack, he was not as good as Wu Ming with Holy Sword. In terms of speed and agility, he was not as good as Wu Ming, who could fly. How could he fight? To be honest, if it wasn't for the effect of the reverse blessing, he would have already left the stage. Because this time, Wu Ming was going all out against Tristan. In Wu Ming's view, it was enough to let him go once for the sake of his comrade. After all, if their identities were reversed, he didn't think that Tristan, who had received the reversed blessing, would let him go. He had tried to obstruct him time and time again. Even if he was a comrade, Wu Ming would not tolerate him, not to mention, Tristan, who had received the reversed blessing, was too arrogant. Looking at that face, Wu Ming couldn't help but want to beat him up. It's not that I didn't give you a chance, Tristan. I let you make the first move. Wu Ming looked at him as if he had gotten a great bargain. Thank you very much, Master Villo. With a tough smile on his face, Tristan responded to Wu Ming, but his smile was still arrogant. It should be impossible to get information from your mouth. Leave, Tristan. With a wave of his hand, the annihilation lock appeared behind Wu Ming, trapped Tristan, and tied him up like a rice dumpling. The annihilation lock could annihilate magic power, and it was made of magic power. In other words, if the annihilation lock continued to affect the servant could leave the stage. Goodbye, Tristan. Chapter 773. I wonder how Tachika and the others are doing. While putting away the annihilation lock, Wu Ming looked in the direction of Nishino village. If Tristan's arrival was not an accident, then there might be enemies in Nishino village. I have to go back and check it out. However, just as Wu Ming was about to leave, he suddenly stopped. Because Wu Ming suddenly thought of something that can be used. Nishino village, where Gadatsi and others were. Gadatsi and others were still in a stalemate with the enemies below. And because the enemy had charged several times, Gadatsi and others also knew the identity of the enemy, Knight Su Zheng of the Holy City. Every time the person who charged up was wearing Knight Su Zheng's armor. Although there was a possibility that someone else could impersonate him, the probability was too low. By the way, because of Ituta's bow and arrows and Cursed Wrist Hassan and Hyuga Hassan's daggers, those knights who charged were repelled. Amazing, worthy of being a hero of the past. Even though he was now very mature, Matthew still looked at these servants with awe. Whether it was the bow, arrow, or dagger, they all hit Knight Su Zheng's knee through the gap in the armor and forced Knight Su Zheng to retreat. Although he also had the advantage of the terrain, a hero is still a hero. Roman, who was assisting in the battle, knew more than Matthew, so Roman also sighed. That's all I can do. Tranquil Hassan said that she did not feel that she was very powerful. Tranquil is right. We Hassan are just people who walk in the dark. In the end we can't do anything. Cursed Wrist Hassan agreed. Then Cursed Wrist Hassan looked at Ituta, who had his bow and arrow aimed below to prevent the enemy's sudden charge. Sir Ituta, your skills are beyond my expectations. Originally, Cursed Wrist Hassan only wanted Itoda Sato to deal with Solemn Knight because he was an archer. Who would have thought that Kurodo Ta was so skilled? Cursed Wrist Hassan had never seen Kurodo Ta miss. Basically, every arrow hit the enemy's knee. Ah, Lord Cursed Wrist, you flatter me. I'm just a crude person who likes food. Although he said that, Itafuda actually enjoyed Cursed Wrist Hassan's praise. This was a good reflection that the other party was indeed a boor. Most of the villagers should have moved away by now. We can't keep wasting time like this. The enemy has basically figured out our numbers. Cursed Wrist Hassan was a little worried. Every time the Solemn Knight charged, it was as if the position was predetermined. If Cursed Wrist Hassan and the others attacked, they would gradually expose the number of people who could attack from a distance. If they did not attack, the other party would charge again. And because the other party had groped a lot, the Solemn Knight almost rushed up several times. If it weren't for Matthew and Bedivere to repel the other party when they rushed up, I'm afraid the enemy would have already rushed up. However, because of this, the other party almost figured out the exact number of people on their side again. All kinds of phenomena showed that the other party had a wise commander. As long as he was given a little more time, he would probably command the Solemn Knight to charge up. With this thought in mind, Cursed Wrist Hassan suddenly realized something. How long has it been since the other party launched a charge? About 10 minutes, Roman, who was a combat support, reported. But if I remember correctly, the Solemn Knight's charge is very regular. About 5 minutes, Roman said again. Could it be that the other party has made a new move? Gadatsi also realized the problem. Since the other party has broken the pattern, I'm afraid it's really like what Her Excellency Tachika said. The other party has made a new move. Quietly poking his head out, Cursed Wrist Hassan looked down and found that the other party did not show any signs of charging again. Then, Cursed Wrist Hassan looked at Gadatsi and spoke as if he was asking for a discussion. Let's retreat, Her Excellency Tachika. Staying here now was tantamount to waiting for death. Besides, the villagers of Dongji village were almost done with their relocation. After Gadatsi nodded, everyone immediately began to retreat toward Dongji village. At the corner below, the Solemn Knight lined up neatly on the mountain road. The commander at the front was a knight in purple armor and a girl with brown skin wearing revealing clothes. The two of them were Lancelot and Nidicles. There was no doubt that the magician who helped the Solemn Knight army advance was Nidicles. What's wrong, Lancelot Knight? Aren't you going to charge? The other party might have run away. However, in the face of Nidicles' words, Lancelot just closed his eyes. I know what I'm doing. What a joke. Although his daughter did not notice him, he did notice the other party. It was not easy to find the organization Wu Ming, in order to impress his daughter. How could he go against his daughter at this time? If she could say, "You did a great job, Dad," when the time came he would die without regrets. So, it was fine to drag it out now. Even if the higher-ups held him accountable afterwards, what was there to be afraid of? Anyway, he would have to turn against them later. This was Lancelot's fantasy in his mind with his eyes closed. Nidicles looked at Lancelot with a rather wretched smile with disgust. Obviously he looks okay, but he actually shows such a smile. It's really disgusting. But it's good not to attack. Anyway, Swordsmanship only said to help the people of the Holy City. I used magic to bring the other party's troops here, which can be considered as help. In fact, it was not only Lancelot who discovered Matthew through the last wave of the previous charge, but Nidicles also discovered Matthew. However, although it was Swordsmanship's idea, Nidicles would be happy if she could comply with Swordsmanship's idea and at the same time ensure the safety of Matthew and the others. Anyway, she was not from the Holy City, and the Lion King had no right to question her. When the time came, she could just push the responsibility to Lancelot. In this way, the two leaders stopped communicating and were in a stalemate. This made the solemn knights suffer. They could only wait here foolishly. It could not be helped. As a knight, the most important thing was to obey the orders of the higher-ups. If something happened, they could just push the responsibility to the leader, Lancelot. It was impossible for Lancelot to betray them. In this way, the solemn knights also relaxed. A large group of people waited here quietly, waiting. Chapter 774. They quickly returned to East Village, and it was Arash who greeted Gadotsi and the others. You're back. Everyone hurry up and evacuate. The villagers have already retreated, Arash said. Then let's go, everyone. With Gadotsi's order, everyone passed through the portal and instantly arrived at West Village. No matter what, I feel it's incredible that you can teleport over such a long distance. Villo is really abnormal. Roman, who was sitting in the Chaldea control room, watched Gadotsi's coordinates move to a place far away in an instant, and he couldn't help but sigh. Ignoring Roman, Gadotsi immediately looked at the villagers around the portal. Everyone, let's go. There shouldn't be anyone left behind, right? The villagers all shook their heads, indicating that no one was left behind. By the way, why don't I see Miss Hassan and Senior Villo? Matthew looked around. Other than the few followers and Gadotsi, there were only the villagers of East Village and the villagers of West Village who came to join in the fun. They probably left for a while, but with Assassin's character she should have left someone to take care of us. Of course, I'm the person my master left behind to take care of you, monkey, you. A rather lively voice reached the ears of Gadotsi and the others. Following that, an angel-like figure slowly floated down from the sky, accompanied by a flurry of feathers. I remember you are Miss Gopral, right? Matthew was happy that he still remembered the other party's name. Although as a monkey, although you called my name directly, you are Master's friends. Sigh. Gopral shrugged and looked rather helpless. If Master finds out that I'm rude to these monkeys, he will definitely hit me on the head. Therefore, Gopral, who chose to follow her heart, suppressed the thought that she couldn't see through the monkey in her heart. Master found something unusual around this village. Combined with the sound just now, I'm afraid there are enemies attacking. Gopral crossed her legs, crossed her arms, and maintained a lying posture, floating in the sky. Since the enemy is attacking, we should go and help Assassin. Then Gadotsi looked at Matthew. Let's go, Matthew. Your Senior Villo needs help. Yes, Master. With a wave of his hand, Matthew materialized his shield and was ready to go. Master's battle ended long ago. Besides, Master is not a weakling who needs help, Giliel suddenly said. At the same time he emitted a terrifying aura. The villagers were so scared that they didn't dare to move, and the servants present were also in a state of facing a formidable enemy. Tachika, be careful. This guy is super dangerous. Roman, who was sitting in Chaldea, detected the magical power of Gopral through the instrument. She was no longer an ordinary servant, she was even stronger than a first-class servant. Even if you say so, Doctor, what can we do now? Swallowing her saliva, Gadotsi quietly talked to Roman. Of course, Master likes the weak very much, so I won't do anything to you. As if the prank was successful, Gopral instantly put away her terrifying aura and put on a cute smile. But no one would think that Gopral was a little girl because of her cute smile. You're scaring people again, Gopral? At this time a familiar voice came through. Wu Ming's figure appeared directly behind Gopril and stretched out a hand and pressed on her head. Master, you're here, ah. The smile on Gopril's face changed again from a cute smile to a harmless smile, and it was getting stronger and stronger. Remember, don't scare people in the future. However, Wu Ming just patted Gopril's head and didn't do anything to Gopril. Master. In Gopril's opinion, after scaring so many people in such a big occasion, he should at least be punished a little. Without saying much, Wu Ming patted Gopril's head and landed on the ground. Feels like Master is a little unreal. Gopril narrowed her eyes and looked at Wu Ming, who landed on the ground. But immediately, Gopril returned to her original state. Just as Gopril said before, Wu Ming was not so weak that he needed help. Naturally, Wu Ming was not so weak that he needed her, Gopril, to be suspicious of him. After all, even if it was unreal, it must be Wu Ming's doing, so there was no need to worry. Gopril, who thought it through, flapped her wings and flew down. Is 100 Faces Hassan here? After Wu Ming landed, he immediately looked for 100 Faces Hassan. I'm here. 100 Faces Hassan answered and immediately stood out from the crowd. In fact, she had just arrived, which was why she squeezed out from the crowd. You and Cursed Wrist Hassan, settle the villagers down for the time being, find a room, and start the emergency meeting immediately. Looking at Wu Ming's serious expression, 100 Faces Hassan obediently guided the villagers with Cursed Wrist Hassan. After 100 Faces Hassan prepared a house for Wu Ming and the others for the meeting, Wu Ming and the others gathered together. Did you find something unexpected? Da Vinci was the first to ask. In fact, other than some strange things, Da Vinci was quite reliable. I met Tristan nearby. Didn't he sign a contract with the senior Villo, and the senior Villo sent him to the desert? Matthew's meaning was clear. Why did the other party suddenly come here? It's really strange, and as far as I know, Tristan should have been suppressed by Ramses II under his pyramid. However, Tristan came out. And if I'm not wrong, you guys have also met the enemy, right? Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi. Gadotsi was taken aback, then nodded. The timing of the arrival of people from these two villages is too coincidental, so I have to think. I suspect that this is a premeditated joint attack. Immediately after, Da Vinci touched his smooth chin. In other words, you suspect that the Sun King and the Lion King have joined forces. What? Gadotsi and the others were obviously shocked. That's impossible. Cursed Wrist Hassan immediately began to deny it. The Sun King and the Lion King fought for so long, and in the end, because of the stalemate, they were forced to make a non-aggression agreement with each other. I don't think these two enemies will join forces. However, Wu Ming did not agree. There are no eternal enemies, only eternal interests, not to mention. Wu Ming paused and did not say anything else. Da Vinci, who probably guessed it, just smiled and did not speak. The others could not guess. In the end, Bedivere, as a knight of the Round Table, spoke. Maybe it's because they have a new enemy. Chapter 775. I think Bedivere is right. I think so too. The think tank, Da Vinci, nodded and told everyone his guess. Previously, the Sun Monarch and the Lion Monarch fought as equals mainly because the third force, the Mountain Folk, was too weak. Although it wasn't nice to say that, it was an established fact. But now there's a new force, which is the new force of angels summoned by the Villo himself. Those angels aren't as weak as the Mountain Folk, so they naturally pose a threat to the Lion Monarch and the Sun Monarch. As such, the polarization between the Lion Monarch and the Sun Monarch has collapsed. Although the triangle was indeed very sturdy, it shouldn't be forgotten that although the Mountain Folk were weak, they were still considered the third force. The sturdy and stable triangle had a fourth force in the middle, which directly broke the stability of the triangle. But in that case, shouldn't the Sun Monarch and the Lion Monarch attack the Assassin's Angels? Why are they looking for trouble with the Mountain Folk? Gadotsi couldn't understand this point. Regarding this point, Wu Ming spoke. Actually, the Skywing species, which are the angels you speak of, are now hovering above the village with a bont. Sigh. Everyone exclaimed and subconsciously raised their heads. Due to the cover of the roof, they couldn't see outside. But even without the cover of the roof, Gadotsi and the others probably couldn't see a bont 10,000 meters above the ground with their naked eyes. However, these people subconsciously raised their heads to express their shock. Before coming here, a bont carried me past the holy city, so it's not unreasonable for the Lion Monarch to know that the Skywing species are here. Therefore the Sun Monarch and the Lion Monarch teamed up not to deal with the fourth force, or rather not entirely. They could also wipe out the mountain folk while they were at it. Wait, doesn't that mean that the location of this village is also exposed? Gadotsi was shocked. I'm afraid so. Wu Ming did not think that the Lion King did not know the location of this village. Even the East Village, which was more hidden than the West Village, had been discovered. There was no reason why the West Village had not been discovered. Although that is the truth, fortunately, Tristan has already left the stage. Holy City has lost another fighting force. This was Wu Ming's assurance after personally sending Tristan off. Moreover, now that we are all here and a bounty is still in the sky, even if the Lion King uses the Holy Spear to attack, it won't have much effect. This can be considered a piece of good news amidst the misfortune. Sitting in Chaldea's control room, Roman leaned back and sighed. Things were getting more and more chaotic. Then what should we do now? Should we attack the Lion King directly or change our plan? Cursed Wrist Hassan said as he looked at Wu Ming, who had vaguely become the backbone of the entire team. Change the plan is certain, but we can't change it at will. After Wu Ming finished speaking, he crossed his chest with one hand, touched his chin with the other hand and began to think. Wu Ming had begun to doubt whether what the Sun King said to him was misleading him. Perhaps, Wu Ming was completely deceived by the Sun King's uninterested in anything look. Why don't we split up? Gadotsi suddenly said. Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi. After all, Gadotsi had also experienced 5 singularities. She was almost a master who could take charge of the situation on her own. Since she made a suggestion, he had to listen to it. Assassin, you should be able to take your angels to attack the holy city. Then, I will take the remaining servants to the desert to find the Sun King. However, as soon as Gadotsi finished speaking, Wu Ming denied it. No, you can't beat the Sun King. As long as his shrine is still there, he will not die. Not to mention how huge his shrine complex is, it is not easy to destroy it. Ramses II still has the avatar of the sky god around him. Although Nidicles looked very weak, so weak that she was almost kidnapped by Hassan, she was still a character that could not be underestimated. At that moment, Da Vinci suddenly interrupted. The enemy we encountered had the help of a caster servant. There shouldn't be any powerful caster in the holy city, right? After all, they were all knights. In the face of Da Vinci's question, Wu Ming answered truthfully. The only person with the potential of a caster is a berserker. Although she can also use the caster's power, from the perspective of her identity, it should be impossible for her to follow the army. So, in the East Village, the caster who helped the Holy City's team should be Miss Nidicles. Matthew felt that he should have guessed correctly. After all, it was a cooperation. The Sun King sent someone, Nidicles, to the Lion King, and the Lion King also sent someone, Tristan, to the Sun King. And it also explained why Tristan came to the West Village near the desert. This was a cooperation, wasn't it? Even if Nidicles is not on the Sun King's side, Ramses II, who has the blessing of the Great Shrine, is not something you can deal with. Even if it was Wu Ming, it would be quite difficult for him to defeat Ramses II with the blessing of the Great Shrine. Even Wu Ming was quite difficult, let alone others. That was why Wu Ming was not optimistic about Gadotsi. There was no other way. Wu Ming had a lot of servants, but they were not elite. But looking at the Lion King and the Sun King, even if their subordinates were dead, they were still very strong. What's more, their subordinates were not dead yet. So, how about we attack the holy city, and the senior Villo go to the Sun King's side? Matthew said. Since they couldn't do it, then Wu Ming should do it. However, Wu Ming shook his head. No, I have something to confront the Lion King face to face and... Wu Ming paused. The Lion King is not someone you can defeat. You may not be able to pass Gawain's test alone. Well? Matthew sighed. What should they do? In fact, Wu Ming had a way. After all, he had already used that, but he wanted to see how Gadotsi would choose. When Wu Ming was at his wit's end, Gadotsi suddenly thought of something. By the way, what about Wang Hassan? When Gadotsi said this, everyone also reacted. Yes, Gadotsi and the others did not go to Wang Hassan to travel, but to ask for help. Since Gadotsi and others returned safely, and they also got the approval of the first Hassan, then the first Hassan would definitely help Gadotsi. Although Wang Hassan didn't say how to help us, he said that as long as we encounter difficulties, he will definitely come to help us. Gadotsi's eyes were quite firm. She believed that Wang Hassan would not go back on his words. But I don't think it will work. Chapter 776. I don't think the first Hassan will be of any help to you in defeating Ramses II. You should know that Ramses II is a man whose head was once cut off by the first Hassan, but Ramses II is still not dead. He relied on his great shrine to reconnect his head and body. What? Cursed Wrist Hassan, Hundred Face Hassan, and Tranquil Hassan were all surprised. Even the first Hassan can't do anything to the Sun King? On this point Wu-ming did not reply. The first Hassan did not kill people at will, but since he had made a decision, he would listen to the instructions of the evening bell and carry out the assassination. But if the assassination failed, the result would be like now. After the first Hassan assassinated Ramses II once, he would not do it a second time. Wait. Wu-ming suddenly realized a problem. Ramses II, who had witnessed the power of the first Hassan, or rather Ramses II who had been warned, should not cause any more trouble. However, he was still causing trouble now. Was he not afraid that the first Hassan would really cut him down? In the face of the crown assassin, Wu-ming did not think that Ramses II, who had an ordinary psionic base, would not be afraid. It turned out that he had been very afraid after that, but now he was not afraid anymore. Tristan, the mountain folk, and Wu-ming, who had joined forces with the Lion King to deal with Chaldea and the others. In addition, if it were not for the fact that Wu-ming wanted to transfer the villagers at the last minute, or had such a long-distance transfer method, Wu-ming might not have come to West Village at all. Let's make another assumption. If Wu-ming, Abanti, and the Skywing species were not in West Village, but went to East Village where Gadotsi and the others were, then what did it mean for Tristan to come to West Village alone? It meant that West Village would be perfectly wiped out. Tristan, who had received the reverse blessing, had no pity in his heart. Without the existence of Wu-ming, Abanti, and the Skywing species, coupled with Gadotsi and the others who could not support them in time, West Village would undoubtedly be wiped out. The most important point was that Tristan had set up a large number of vacuum traps around West Village. The other party had also indirectly admitted that those traps were used to kill the villagers who had escaped. However, if Tristan knew that Wu-ming was there, he would not have set up those traps because they were completely useless. However, Tristan had set up so many traps. Moreover, when he saw Wu-ming, Tristan said, "I didn't expect you to be here." Although it sounded like a joke, Wu-ming, he felt that it was true. In other words, Tristan wasn't here for Wu-ming. He was here for the mountain dwellers. What's the benefit? Of course it's the roots. While attacking East Village, which had a lot of combat power, he also eliminated West Village, leaving the villagers who had escaped with nowhere to go. This was a plan to wipe them out. Even if he wanted to eliminate Wu-ming, it should not be like this because it was the same to Wu-ming whether there were mountain villagers or not. There was no reason for Ramses II not to understand this. However, since the other party did not seem to be here for Wu-ming, could it be for the master of Chaldea? Wu-ming glanced at Gadotsi. Gadotsi saw that Wu-ming was looking at her and smiled back at Wu-ming. Immediately after, Wu-ming also smiled back at Gadotsi. Wu-ming thought of a possibility. If that was the case, it would be terrible. Whether it was for this singularity or for Wu-ming himself, it was quite terrible. But the premise now was what happened to East Village. "I'll go out first, you guys stay here for a while." Before Wu-ming could finish his words, black-purple ripples instantly engulfed Wu-ming. In an instant, Wu-ming arrived at the location of East Village, but at this moment, there was no sign of life in East Village. It could even be said that there were no living things in East Village. Instantly unfolding his mental power, Wu-ming captured the entrance of the solemn night army hidden on the mountain path of East Village. The leader was Lancelot and Nitocris was also here. Was Da Vinci right? But this was not the point. The point was that Wu-ming found that the solemn night army had begun to retreat. Although this retreat was somewhat inexplicable, for the sake of Wu-ming's next guess, Wu-ming did not leave but waited quietly. Pushing his mental power to the maximum, after waiting for a little while, Wu-ming felt the fluctuation of magic power. One was from the sky in the west, and the other was from the sky in the east. There were attacks coming from both sides of the sky, and the destination was undoubtedly here, East Village. The thick lightning of the temple collided with the sharp and hot light of the holy spear. It was like a nuclear bomb colliding, combining together. In this Dongji village, Wu-ming, who had already withdrawn from the range of the attack, saw the two attacks turn East Village into nothingness, and became more and more certain of his guess. Wu-ming recognized these two attacks. One was the attack of the Great Temple of Ramses II, and the other was the attack of the Holy Spear. However, these two attacks were the most powerful attacks Wu-ming had ever seen. However, such attacks certainly could not be launched consecutively. They should be similar to the kind of attack that accumulated power. Even if a Bonte and the Skywings were here facing a real attack, they would not be able to completely protect East Village. Annihilating the West Village and greatly destroying the East Village, it was as if they were trying to exterminate this special human. If all the humans of this singularity disappeared, then there would be no saving and humanity's salvation would fail. Wu Ming could understand why the Lion King attacked the people outside the holy city with the holy spear because she had done it before. The holes in the ground were an example. Those in the holy city were good people, so those outside the holy city were bad people. Using the holy spear to slaughter the bad people was equivalent to preserving the purest human beings. However, Ramses II's approach was quite outrageous. However, if the other party was not Ramses II but Gidea's people, then everything would be fine. Gidea's priority was never to kill Wu Ming but something else. Wu Ming was just the most threatening stumbling block for Gidea. Basically, as long as it was a singularity with Wu Ming, there would be traces of Gidea. In Winterwood, Floros wanted to attack Wu Ming, but he was killed by Wu Ming. In North America, Gidea personally created a few holy grails in order to increase the difficulty for Wu Ming and Chaldea. In the end, who would have thought that the forces who obtained the holy grail were still no match for Wu Ming, and one of them was even given away for free? And now, at this singularity, the appearance of the Lion King was not Gidea's doing, so his doing should be Ramses II, who previously held the holy grail. Although Wu Ming felt that Gidea should still be recuperating, it was the same to send his subordinates. Therefore, Wu Ming was guessing whether Ramses II's sudden betrayal was caused by Gidea or Gidea's subordinates. Or rather, was Ramses II still Ramses II now? Chapter 777. Wu Ming did not think that Ramses II was the kind of person who would change his temperament. Clearly he was fine a moment ago, but in the next second he directly turned hostile. More importantly, the primary purpose of Ramses II at this moment had become to destroy the singularity and accelerate the collapse of the singularity. Suppose that your task was to kill someone you caught, but in the end you found that the person you caught was not completely dead, and then someone came to save the person you caught. Then, would you choose to kill the person who was not completely dead, or would you choose to kill the person who saved the person first, and then kill the person who was not completely dead? Of course, smart people would choose the former, so Ramses II also chose the former, directly destroying the singularity. And it just so happened that this choice was also what Gidea was happy to see. As for the Lion King, no matter what her real plan was, she would also be happy to see the destruction of the mountain people. After all, a group of ants building a nest in front of your house, even if they were harmless, you would not like it. The most important thing was that the Lion King needed to collect pure people, and the impure people had to be destroyed. The traces of the Holy Lance's baptism on the earth could also be very good at explaining all this. Therefore, the Lion King and the Sun King began to cooperate. The Sun King released Tristan and let him destroy West Village, while the Sun King lent Nidicles to the Lion King. An army with Castor's magic would definitely be stronger than nothing. If it were not for Chaldea's instrument being indirectly destroyed by Wu Ming and upgraded several times by Da Vinci, perhaps Roman would not have found out that someone was approaching East Village. If that was the case, by the time he found out, the Solemn Knight would have already come to the entrance of the village. Although the Solemn Knight could not defeat the servants, let alone Wu Ming and Wu Ming's Skywing species, he could not withstand the Solemn Knight's many people, and the Solemn Knight could fight a war of attrition. Moreover, the Solemn Knight did not need to wipe out the villagers of East Village. What was the role of the Solemn Knight? There was no doubt that it was used as a foreshadowing, and the real move was still behind. The real move was Wu Ming's nuclear bomb baptism that he saw with his own eyes. The nuclear bomb baptism directly razed Dongji village to the ground. If everything went according to the original plan, Tristan would have already destroyed the West Village by then. Therefore, it didn't matter whether he destroyed the people of the East Village or not. Through this, Wu Ming also understood why only Tristan was loitering around West Village. It was because there was no need to send too many people. Tristan alone was enough. According to the original plan, after the villages on both sides were destroyed, without a fixed residence, the villagers would not be able to survive for long. Don't think that just because you're a mountain dweller, you can live deep in the mountains. It's not like you're a non-human. Mountain dwellers are also human. There must be some who survived, but the number of survivors must be quite small. If the Lion King and the Sun King sent troops to search the mountainous areas, the people of the mountains would definitely be wiped out. Of course, all of this could only be carried out under the premise of going according to the original plan. Tristan being discovered by Wuming meant that this plan couldn't be carried out. Even if Wuming wasn't in the West Village, Agbont and Gopro would be enough to make Tristan suffer. However, what Wuming didn't understand was how the other side knew that there were only 2 villages in the mountain dwellers. And how did they discover and attack them almost simultaneously? Wuming still couldn't figure this out. However, if there were Gidea's people on the Sun King's side, or if the Sun King himself had been replaced by the demon god Pillar, knowing the specific location of the 2 villages wouldn't be too hard to accept. After all, it was Gidea. After obtaining the black soil, the other side was much stronger than before. Moreover, if the original Gidea wanted to replace Ramses II, it wasn't impossible. However, Wuming was quite optimistic about this. Looks like Gidea can't sit still anymore. Wuming smiled. After all, it was because he was worried that he took action again. However, the other side didn't expect me to discover Tristan. They also didn't expect me to be able to transfer the villagers of the East Village to the West Village. However, if they continued to wait, the other side might make a comeback. This wasn't what Wuming wanted to see. As the saying goes, offense is the best defense. Even if the plan of Wuming's group was disrupted, because of Wuming, the other side's plan was also disrupted. Next, it would depend on who made the first move. Then let's go back first. Wuming said. Gadotsi and the others were probably anxious from waiting. With a wave of his hand, Wuming opened a teleportation gate and directly went in. In an instant, Wuming returned to the temporary meeting room in the West Village. As soon as Wuming returned, Gadotsi immediately pounced on him. Assassin. We have a way to deal with the Sun King. Gadotsi was quite excited, like a golden retriever eager to be patted by its owner. After patting Gadotsi's head, Wuming said, "Then tell me what is the way." At this time, the servant who had the ability to solve the problem of Ramses II's shrine stood up. About the great shrine of Ramses II, my noble phantasm should be able to destroy it. Wuming took a closer look and it turned out to be a Rosh. So that's how it is. The earth-shattering strike was sublimated and became a noble phantasm. Although that was what he said, Wuming was a little worried. So what was the price? Was it like the legend where the body was directly torn apart? However, Wuming did not ask and the other people did not speak. Even Roman in the control room did not speak this time. As long as the great shrine is destroyed, the Sun King should not have that kind of powerful immortal ability. At that time, with the help of King Hassan, we can defeat the Sun King. Gadotsi was full of confidence. However, Tachika, you still have to be careful. Wuming looked serious. Anyway, the other party is also a top-level servant. It's impossible for the shrine to be destroyed. I will be careful. Gadotsi smiled and nodded. However, Gadotsi pulled Matthew over. And Matthew will protect me, don't worry. Yes. Yes, Villo-senpai, I will protect Master. Although he was a little flustered because of Gadotsi's sudden attack, Matthew still replied with confidence. Seeing such a scene, Wuming was almost relieved. Wuming took Gadotsi's hand and said blessings. May the root be with you. No one noticed that a strange command spell was attached to Gadotsi's shield-type command spell. Wuming's strange blessing made Gadotsi stunned, but since it was a blessing, she accepted it. Right. Gadotsi suddenly thought of something. Assassin, do you know what happened to the explosion and the lightning in the sky? Chapter 778. Of course I know, and this has a lot to do with me verifying whether my guess is correct. Afterward, Wuming looked around at everyone. Do you want to listen to my analysis? In this regard, everyone gave the same answer. Of course. Afterward, Wuming told everyone about the explosion of East Village, the joint attack of the Sun King and the Lion King, and Wuming's own conjecture. Of course, Wuming replaced the part about Gidea with the part about the Magic King. After all, in the eyes of Matthew and the others, the Magic King was the culprit. Roman, who was sitting in the Chaldea control room, sighed for a minute. Because Wuming had already sorted out his thoughts, he spoke very quickly. In other words, we are now attacked from both sides. Although the situation was very bad, Da Vinci could still laugh. As expected of Da Vinci's kin. After listening to Wuming's explanation, Matthew looked incredulous. This is too. The Sun King, who was originally neutral and had indirectly helped them, suddenly joined forces with the Lion King and launched such a powerful attack on them. This not only made Matthew somewhat unacceptable, but Gadotsi was also surprised. Of course, these are just my guesses. No one said that this is right. Wuming shrugged. Although Wuming said so, but, according to the Villow's logic, this is probably the case. Roman, who was in the Chaldea control room, said regretfully. Indeed, everything that is happening now is basically the same as the Villow's conjecture. It can't be denied even if you want to. Da Vinci still said in a relaxed tone. If the Magic King came in person, that would be terrible. Matthew was quite worried. Don't worry, Matthew, the Magic King can't come in person. Da Vinci's words made him feel surprised. This was what Wu Ming had wanted to say. Da Vinci smiled faintly when he saw Wu Ming's astonished expression. We're just struggling at death's door. If the Magic King wants to wipe us out, he can easily do it. Plus, he said that we can't be considered a threat if we haven't dealt with the 7 singularities. Why would such a proud Magic King lower himself to come here? Geniuses were indeed geniuses. Their understanding was also different from ordinary people. After hearing Da Vinci's words, I suddenly feel much more at ease. Gadotsi patted her chest and took a deep breath. Actually, if one thought about it carefully, this was indeed the case because that was without Wu Ming. If not for Wu Ming, Tristan would not have gone to the Sun King's place. If not for Wu Ming, the Sun King would not have been suspected of being possessed and betrayed. Wu Ming felt that these 2 points were very important. If not for him, perhaps Gadotsi and the others would have a smoother time. However, at this point there were no ifs. Therefore, Wu Ming was still very worried. Compared to your focus, I'm more surprised that the Ramses II mentioned by this guy has been replaced. 100 Faces Hassan also spoke. After all, 100 Faces Hassan was a Hassan from a village near the desert. Although she did not have a direct conflict with the Sun King, she had witnessed the Sun King's power. He was a powerhouse full of majesty and dominance. This was as shocking as Afu suddenly saying that she was actually a real girl and even showing that she did not have a big treasure. It's indeed a little unbelievable. Cursed Wrist Hassan also nodded. I'm just guessing. The truth can only be determined after seeing the person in person. Wu Ming shrugged, indicating that he was innocent. No matter what the truth is, all of you need to be 120% vigilant. This was the only point that everyone must be clear about. Understood. Gadotsi saluted Wu Ming, indicating that she understood. Nodding, Wu Ming looked at everyone. There's no time to lose. Everyone, let's go now and try to fix this singularity today. Can it be so fast? Roman was quite surprised. Not to mention rushing, even fighting would take some time. Of course it can be so fast. After all, I'm here. Wu Ming snapped his fingers. In an instant, a dark purple portal opened under Gadotsi's feet. Ah, senpai. Accompanied by Gadotsi's scream and Matthew's wail, Gadotsi disappeared instantly. But then Gadotsi fell from the portal that appeared above Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming carried Gadotsi in a princess carry. Whoa. You really scared me, assassin. Gadotsi hugged Wu Ming's neck and acted coquettishly. This made Hassan, who had been quiet on the side, quite jealous. I'm sorry, Wu Ming said apologetically. He only wanted to make a small joke. And Matthew also breathed a sigh of relief. Phew, senpai is fine. Senpai Villo, don't make such jokes in the future. In the end, Matthew puffed up his cheeks and looked at Wu Ming rather angrily. If Lancelot was here, he would probably have a nosebleed. Wu Ming thought so. Then Wu Ming put Gadotsi on the ground, walked to Matthew and put his hand on his little head. I'm sorry, I won't be so sudden next time. Forgive me, my dear junior. Okay. Matthew nodded with a flushed face. He couldn't help it. Wu Ming's smile was too lethal. Gadotsi immediately ran over and separated Wu Ming and Matthew, and hugged Matthew protectively in her arms. Okay, don't bully my Matthew, really. Although that was what she said, Gadotsi actually had a coquettish look on her face which was quite pleasing. Well, can we get back to the topic? As an honest person, Cursed Wrist Hassan raised his hand. Wu Ming smiled awkwardly and then became serious. As you can see, I can connect the places I've been to. I've been to Ramses II's Grand Temple, so I can create a passage that leads directly to the vicinity of the Grand Temple. Wu Ming had been to Ramses II's place, so there was no problem in building a portal here. Everyone nodded in agreement. Everyone was quite satisfied with this direct home invasion move. But at this moment, Cursed Wrist Hassan asked again. Don't you need to leave a few servants here? I'm still worried about the safety of this village. If they all left, what if the enemy attacked again? This was also very likely. Direction a bont won't leave. Wu Ming pointed to the sky. Cursed Wrist Hassan did not speak and seemed to be thinking. Don't worry, Cursed Wrist, that big guy is still very reliable. As a bont who had guarded the village for a while, 100 Faces Hassan was quite satisfied with a bont. Since 100 Faces Hassan said so, then okay. Cursed Wrist Hassan compromised, and the last one to speak was Gadatsi. As the master of the servants, she began to cheer them up. Good. Then everyone, the final battle is about to begin. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.